how to grow more vegetables, and fruits, nuts, berries, grains, and other crops, than you ever thought possible on less land than you can imagine. John Jeavons. Introduction. History and philosophy of the Grow Biointensive method, how to use this book. 1. Deep soil creation and maintenance. Getting started. Correct tools, laying out your beds, types of deep soil preparation, general double digging procedure, considerations for initial dig with very poor soils, prepared beds. 2. Sustainability. Sustainable soil fertility, the loss of soil nutrients and humus, initially adding nutrients and humus to the soil, 100% sustainability impossible, the need for up to 99% sustainability, Ecology Action's pursuit of sustainability, how to design for your soil's fertility. 3. The use of compost and soil fertility. A natural system, compost functions, the process, soil and other materials in the compost pile, locating the pile, size and timing, building the pile, watering the pile, compost curing and application rates, composting methods compared, materials to use minimally or not at all, benefits of compost in the soil, building a compost pile step by step. All compost is not equal. 4. Fertilization. Soil testing, taking a soil sample, pH, recommended sources of nutrients, adding fertilizers and compost, more sustainable fertilization. 5. Open pollinated seeds, seed propagation, close spacing, and seed-saving seed planting, seedling flats, flat soil, some causes of poor germination, pricking out seedlings, transplanting, spotting, planting by the phases of the moon, watering, shade netting, many greenhouses, key water factors, weeding, planting in season. 6. Companion planting. Health, rotations, nourishing the soil, physical complementarity, weed, insect, and animal relationships. 7. An interrelated food-raising system, creating and caring for a balanced natural ecosystem with insect life. Natural predators, other initiatives. 8. Master charts and planning. Letter codes, vegetable and garden crops, calorie, grain, protein source, and vegetable oil crops, compost, carbon, organic matter, fodder, and cover crops, energy, fiber, paper, and other crops, tree and cane crops, flower spacing chart, herb spacing chart, planning sheet. 9. Sample garden plans. Foreword by Alice Waters. In the early days at Shape Annis, 40 years ago, we had to scrounge for decent beans, pick lemons from neighbors' trees, and hunt far and wide for a variety of produce of any quality whatsoever. But farming has evolved in California. We now work with, at last count, nearly 50 local, small-scale, family-run farms that grow organically and sustainably the seasonal fruits and vegetables that are the foundation of our cooking. In large part, we have John Jeavons to thank for this. I met John on the 20th birthday of Shape Annis just as he was preparing for the 20th anniversary of Ecology Action. We both had a lot to celebrate. The work that John had begun in a small garden at Stanford had inspired small farms on nearly every continent. He had already worked with the Peace Corps in Togo, helped found an agricultural center in Kenya, taught in Mexico, and supported programs in Russia and the Philippines. His work has gone right on inspiring, and at a pace that is fast enough to give us real hope that we will be able to grow sustainable communities around the world. John's methods are nothing short of miraculous. He has shown that almost any soil can be prepared for the planting of food, and that astonishing quantities of high-quality produce can be grown on even the most devastated land. He has worked tirelessly to bring self-sufficiency to the poorest people in the poorest parts of the world. As I write, he's preparing to share his methods with the V1,000 small-scale farmers from 130 own countries who are expected at Terra Madre, the biannual gathering of farmers in Turin, Italy, organized by the Eco-Gastronomes of Slow Food International. I can think of no more appropriate place for the dissemination of his ideas. Vandana Shiva, the outspoken Indian food activist, has said that farms are zones of peace on this planet. A peaceful revolution in agriculture, what I like to call the delicious revolution, has begun, and John is one of its most brilliant leaders. How to grow more vegetables may be one of the most important how-to guides ever written. Preface. Ecology Action and the Common Ground Project by the Ecology Action staff. Ecology Action goal: act as a catalyst, instruct teachers, and train students. The work has always been worthwhile despite the continuing challenge of attracting strong, ongoing support. The biggest single asset to this undertaking is John Jeavons' unfailing stamina and dedication. Over and over, when we all ask, "Can it work?" he answers, "How are we going to make it work?" It is becoming increasingly clear that sustainable mini-farming will be an important part of the solution to starvation and malnutrition, dwindling energy supplies, unemployment, and exhaustion and loss of arable land, if the social and political challenges can be met. After 40 years of testing, food raising has produced amazing benefits. Yields can average 2 to 6 times those of U.S. agriculture, and a few range up to 31 times higher A+ at a time of peak food. But there's still more to learn. For example, we are still working to develop an optimally healthy soil system. Compost and calorie crops present the most challenges because they are crucial in meeting the nutritional needs of people and the soil. Experiments include alfalfa, fava beans, wheat, oats, cardoon, and comfrey. So far our yields are from 1 to 5 times the U.S. average for these crops. Water use is well below that of commercial agriculture per pound of food produced, and is about 33% to 12% that of conventional techniques per unit of land area. This is especially important in a world that has reached a point of peak water. Energy expenditure, expressed in kilocalories of input, is 6% to 1% of that used by commercial agriculture, and this helps meet the challenge of peak oil. The human body is still more efficient than any machine we have been able to invent. Several factors contradict the popular conception that this is a labor-intensive method. Using hand tools may seem to be more work, but the yields more than compensate. Even at 50 cents a pound wholesale, zucchini can bring as much as $18 to $32 per hour depending on the harvest timing because it is easy to grow, maintain, and harvest. Time spent in soil to grow, maintain, and harvest. Time spent in soil preparation is more than offset later in less need for weeding, thinning, cultivation, and other chores per unit of area and per unit of yield. Hand watering and harvesting appear to take the most time. Initial soil preparation, including fertilization and planting, may take 5 to 9.5 hours per 100 square foot raised bed. Thereafter, the time spent decreases dramatically. A new digging tool, the U-bar, has reduced subsequent bed preparation time to as little as 20 minutes. A new hand watering tool that waters more quickly and more gently is also being developed. Nature has answered our original queries with an abundance even greater than expected, and we have narrowed our research to the most important question that can be asked of any agricultural system: is it sustainable? The Grow Biointensive 1 method currently uses 50% or less of the purchased fertilizer that commercial farmers use. Can we maintain all nutrient levels on site, once they have been built up and balanced? Or is some outside additive always necessary? We need to look more closely at all nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, calcium, and trace minerals. Anyone can grow good crops on good soil, cashing in on nature's accumulated riches. The Grow Biointensive method appears to allow anyone to take the worst possible soil and turn it into a bountiful garden or mini-farm. Preliminary monitoring of our soil building process by a University of California soils scientist was probably the most important information garnered about our initial site. Continued monitoring will unlock new secrets and provide hope for people with marginal, worn-out, or desertified soils. However, A complete answer to the long-term question of sustainable soil fertility will require at least 50 years of observation as the living soil system changes and grows. We continue to work on that opportunity. Why not create ecosystems of hope? Note: the grow biointensive method is very energy efficient, in large part because it relies on the work of the capable and efficient human body rather than on the work of machines. One person annually consumes in food the energy equivalent of 32.6 gallons of gasoline. In contrast, the most efficient economy car will use that much gas in a month or two of ordinary driving. Imagine the fuel consumed by a tractor in a year. 9 years of growing and testing in Ecology Action's urban garden mini-farm came to an end in 1980 due to the termination of our lease and new construction on that land. Like so much other agricultural land in the United States, our lovingly tended beds succumbed to the press of urbanization. The city growing area prepared us for a rural site. The facilities of grocery store and electric lines were exchanged for open skies and room to grow more herbs, flowers, vegetables, beans, grains, and compost crops than we ever imagined. At the Common Ground Mini Farm in Willits, California, we are enjoying a permanent site where we can grow trees of all kinds for food, fuel, and beauty. Other projects include a self-fertilizing lawn composed of fragrant herbs and clovers, and a working mini farm. In 1973, we initially estimated that a one-person small holding, 1/8 to half an acre, could grow crops bringing in a net income of $5,000 to $20,000 a year, about $100 to $400 a week, after 4 to 5 years. However, one woman on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, was earning about $400 a week growing gourmet vegetables for restaurants on 1/16 of an acre 20 years after we began. At first she thought it could not be done, but when she tried growing crops for income it worked. She then passed her skills on to 12 other women. Crops grown may include collards, chard, beets, mangels, spinach, green onions, garlic, radishes, romaine and Bibb lettuce, zucchini, patty pan squash, cucumbers, and lavender. Rather than solely looking to Ecology Action for answers, we hope you will dig in and try grow biointensive for yourself. The techniques are simple to use, as this book shows. No large capital expenses are necessary to get started. The techniques work in varied climates and soils. American farmers are feeding the world, but mini-farming can give people the knowledge and empowerment to feed themselves. Posted on the wall of our local environmental center, there once was a tongue-in-cheek guide called 50 Really Difficult Things You Can Do to Save the Earth. The second item was grow all your own vegetables. We had to laugh. We moved up to our new mini-farm in Willits with a plan for short-term food self-sufficiency. That was 40 years ago. We still take a neighborly ribbing for racing down to the farmers' markets to buy sweet corn, carrots, and other vegetables and fruits to feed an extended family of staff, apprentices, interns, and friends at our research site. Research priorities often interfere with growing all our vegetables and fruits. It is difficult to research, write, publish, teach, do outreach around the world and farm all at the same time. Rachel Leller said, "My first garden was a total failure. I planned, dug, and planted, but I had not really learned how to garden yet. Now my favorite class to teach is compost. I bring a glass jar of waste, a slimy brew of potato peels, coffee grounds, and last week's rotting roses. The other jar has compost, sweet-smelling, earthy, and alive, and, by the way, nothing like the sifted and homogenized products sold at garden centers. These 2 jars remind me of the magical transformation of a garden, health from garbage, riches out of waste. I can see that magic immediately, though it may take me years to fully comprehend it." Betsy Bruno, a senior staff person, has an affinity for tiny life forms. She taught us to appreciate the infinitely variable lichens that cling to bare rock and fallen trees, creating soil for larger life forms to follow. People used to bring insects into our store for identification. Betsy's first response was usually a hushed "how beautiful." She marvels at the intensely colorful tomato hornworms, the intricate markings on the shells of wise old snails, and the fact that earwigs are wonderful mothers. We live in an age of consumption, when we are constantly exhorted to measure ourselves by our possessions. Yet no matter how rich we manage to become, something human in us says our true worth is reflected by what we ourselves create. Why not make it full of life and beauty rather than pollution? Our neighbor Ellen spent all day putting up jars of string beans and piccalilli, then worked until midnight to finish up a batch of raspberries. One of her notes reads, "There is no rest for the gardener. But there is always dessert." Gardening is not always easy, but the rewards are personal and fun. For most of us, the environment is what is around us, separate from human activity. Gardening offers the chance to become partners with nature. The reward is not just a salad from the backyard or a gleaming jar of peaches. Gardening is the process of digging the soil, starting small seeds, watching an apple tree grow. Gardening is an education in observation, harmony, honesty, and humility in knowing and understanding our place in the world. But the impact is also global. Alan Chadwick felt that gardening was the only way to prevent another world war, to bring a living, active peace on Earth by working with healthy, creative, positive life forces. In doing this, we become one with those life forces. He felt that, as we breathe life back into the soil, we breathe life back into ourselves. The homegrown tomato requires no fuel for transportation, no packaging to be sent to the landfill, no political decisions about who will be allowed to work the fields or what level of pollutants is acceptable in our groundwater. Nature is not always a Garden of Eden. Some partnership is required to bring out the best in both nature and people. "Give to nature, and she will repay you in glorious abundance" was one of Chadwick's favorite sayings. Gardening and mini farming give us the opportunity to participate in the transformation of desert into dessert. All we need to do is to start with one growing bed and tend it well, and we have begun the exciting, expansive, giving process of enlivening and healing the earth and ourselves. Endnotes. In this book you will see the terms grow biointensive and biointensive. Both refer to individuals, projects, and programs using some and more, respectively, of biologically intensive techniques before Ecology Action's 1999 trademark registration of grow biointensive and or not using all of the grow biointensive features, which have a goal of maximizing closed-system sustainable food raising. Introduction. Building soil, building the future. There is an exciting challenge ahead of us. How can we revitalize our extraordinary planet, ensuring life and health for the environment, the life forms of a myriad of ecosystems, humankind, and future generations? The answer is as close to us as the food we consume each day. We can begin to create a better world from right where we are in home gardens and mini farms. Millions of people in over 140 countries are already using grow biointensive sustainable mini farming techniques to work toward this better world. We farm as we eat. If we consume food that has been grown using methods that inadvertently deplete the soil in the growing process, we are responsible for depleting the soil. It is how we are farming. If, instead, we raise or request food grown in ways that heal the earth, then we are healing the earth and its soils. Our daily food choices make the difference. We can choose to sustain ourselves while increasing the planet's vitality. In the process, we preserve resources, breathe cleaner air, enjoy good exercise, and eat pure food. They're making more people every day, but they ain't making any more dirt. Will Rogers. What are the dimensions of the challenge of raising food that sustains the soil? Current agricultural practices reportedly destroy approximately 6 pounds of soil for each pound of food produced. 1. United States croplands are losing topsoil about 18 times faster than the soil formation rate. This loss is not sustainable. In fact, worldwide only about 33 to 49 years worth of farmable soil remains. 2. Why is this happening? Conventional agricultural practices often deplete the soil 18 to 80 times more rapidly than nature builds soil. This phenomenon happens when the humus, cured organic matter, in the soil is used up and not replaced, when cropping patterns are used that tend to deplete the soil's structure, and when minerals are removed from the soil more rapidly than they are replaced. Even organic farming probably depletes the soil 9 to 67 times faster than nature builds it, by importing organic matter and minerals from other soils, which thereby becomes increasingly depleted. The planetary result is a net reduction in overall soil quality. In contrast, the techniques used in biointensive sustainable mini-farming can build the soil up to 60 times faster than in nature. 3. The overall goal of biointensive techniques, which distinguishes these techniques from biointensive practices, is the miniaturization of food production in a closed system. Biointensive features the use of the following 8 techniques in a closed system that does not use any chemical substances. 10 years ago, Ecology Action coined the term biointensive to refer to this style of production. Biointensive techniques include deep soil preparation, which develops good soil structure. Once this structure is established, it may be maintained for several years with 2-inch deep surface cultivation, until compaction once again necessitates deep soil preparation. The use of compost, humus, for soil fertility and nutrients. Close plant spacing, as in nature. Synergistic planting of crop combinations so plants that are grown together enhance each other. Carbon-efficient crops by which approximately 60% of the growing area is planted, and dual-purpose seed and grain crops for the production of large amounts of carbonaceous material for compost and significant amounts of dietary calories. Calorie-efficient crops by which approximately 30% of the growing area is planted in special root crops, such as potatoes, leeks, garlic, parsnips, and Jerusalem artichokes, which produce a large amount of calories for the diet per unit of area. The use of open-pollinated seeds to preserve genetic diversity. A whole, interrelated farming system. When biointensive is used properly with all of its components, and so all wastes are recycled and enough organic matter is grown to ensure that each farm can produce enough compost to create and maintain sustainable soil fertility, biointensive sustainable mini-farming can create soil rapidly and maintain sustainable soil fertility. It is how each of us uses biointensive, or other food-raising practices, that makes a living difference. Note, up to 6 billion microbial life forms can live in 5 grams of cured compost, about the size of a quarter. The combination of these techniques makes it possible to greatly reduce resources compared to conventional agricultural practices while greatly increasing soil fertility and productivity. A 67% to 88% reduction in water consumption per unit of production. A 50+% reduction in the amount of purchased fertilizer in organic fertilizer form required per unit of production, a 94% to 99% reduction in the amount of energy used per unit of production, a 100+% increase in soil fertility, while productivity increases and resource use decreases, a 200% to 400% increase in caloric production per unit of area. A 100+% increase in income per unit of area. However, biointensive sustainable mini-farming, or any other sustainable farming practice, is not a panacea. If not used properly, biointensive practices can deplete the soil more rapidly than other farming practices because of the high yields. But above all, using only a single agricultural approach to grow food would not be vital. It would be another form of monocropping in a living world ecosystem that thrives on diversity. Sustainable approaches in the future will probably be a synthesis, a sustainable collage, of all biointensive, agroforestry, no-till Fukuoka food raising, traditional Asian blue-green algal wet rice farming, natural rainfall arid farming, indigenous farming. These food-growing techniques are only part of a sustainable future. To preserve the plant and animal genetic diversity upon which we all depend, we will need to keep 1/2 of the world's farmable land in a wild, natural state. As we begin to use sustainable, land and resource-conserving food-raising approaches, more wilderness areas can remain untouched, so more of the endangered plant and animal diversity on this earth can be preserved. This wealth of genetic diversity is necessary if the planet on which we live is to support abundance. Population will increase rapidly, more rapidly than in former times, and ere long the most valuable of all arts will be the art of deriving a comfortable subsistence from the smallest area of soil. Abraham Lincoln. Generally, the challenges of world hunger, soil depletion, and diminishing resources seem so overwhelming that we tend to look for big solutions, such as shipping massive amounts of grain, breeding high-yield miracle crops, or establishing infrastructures, bank loans, machinery and fertilizer purchases, markets, and roads. These solutions create long-term dependency. What is so exciting about a personal approach is that it seeks to answer the question, how do we enable ourselves to take care of our own needs? Personal solutions will have as many varied applications as there are people, soils, climates, and cultures. Our research of one of these sustainable proposals, Grow Biointensive, is a way for people to begin to develop these solutions. Our work grew out of personal concern about worldwide starvation and malnutrition, augmented by a sober assessment of the unsustainability of the most dominant current methods of producing our food. We came to believe that if we could determine the smallest amount of land and resources needed for one person to supply all of his or her own needs in a sustainable way, we might arrive at a personal solution. What if a person could, in a tiny area, easily raise all the crops that would supply all food, clothes, building materials, compost materials, seeds, and income for an entire year? We asked whether others knew the smallest area required. No one did. So we began our 40-year, and counting, quest. The way humankind is currently living and increasing in population, we will not be able to provide for our own food needs soon if we do not grow living soil at a time of peak farmable soil. The charts in Appendix 2 illustrate how that in as little as 2 years, there may only be an average of 9,000 square feet of farmable land per person for a large number of people. We also need to leave half of that land in its natural, wild state to preserve plant and animal genetic diversity in thriving ecosystems. This in turn will enable nature's natural cycles to provide a wonderful life for us all. Therefore, much of that theoretically accessible land becomes limited to about 4,500 square feet, and this availability may be limited further as water becomes less available to water crops. The UNFAO has reported that, in as little as 13 years, in 2025, increasingly limited water availability means that as many as 2/3 of the world population, about 5 billion people, may not have enough water to grow sufficient food. With Grow Biointensive sustainable mini-farming, it may be possible to grow all the food for one's nutrition, as well as food for the soil, on as little as 4,000 square feet, without a great amount of difficulty and with 67% to 88% less water per pound of food produced. This is important, as 70% to 80% of the water used by people is used for farming. If we all have the will, we can transform a water scarcity into water abundance. The energy crisis is not in a barrel of oil, it is primarily in ourselves. We also believe that Grow Biointensive can produce more net income per acre than conventional farming practices. In striving for quality gardening, a person may thus be able to provide a diet and income with a living soil more than sufficient for his or her needs. The ought will produce a human renaissance and a cornucopia of food for all. The whole world is becoming urbanized. Currently, 91% of the people in India live in cities. Soon, 90% of the people in China will be urban. Japan, Mexico, and Kenya are importing approximately 60% of their calories. People are moving to cities for a better life and more food security, yet increasingly the world's surplus food supply is dwindling. What if we were unable to import food at a reasonable price, or not at all? Most of the world's people have lost the skill of farming literacy. The Chinese used to call their farmers living libraries, because they knew that the farmers knew more than they learned in school, from their parents or from millennia of experience and tradition. They felt it in their hands, hearts and hands. We need to relearn this. The Hanunoo culture in the Philippines grew into place in the Stone Age. They still thrive. Its members are illiterate. 80% of their meal conversations are about food raising, and their children play farmer. This culture has a 200-crop, 5-year rotation growing system with 40 varieties of rice grown each year so that whether the climate is hot, cold, wet or dry, they will have a good harvest of calories. The Mayan culture in Guatemala survived when other civilizations around them faded. They did this, in part, through neighborhood biologically intensive food raising. No one knows why this very skilled and intelligent culture eventually disappeared. There are many possibilities, including disease, but one is that the food raising practices may not have been used with full sustainability. Many cultures have faded due to unsustainable soil practices. North Africa used to be the granary for Rome until it was overfarmed. Now it is in great part a desert. The Sahara Desert used to be a forest, until it was clear-cut too frequently. At the rate the world has been becoming desertified since 1977, the planet may be completely desertified in just 70 years. There may even be as little as 33 to 49 years of farmable soil remaining in the world. Our future security now depends on developing new, more productive farming technologies. Lester Brown. We all have an opportunity now to become farming literate. The world has spent the last 30 years becoming computer literate. Why not spend the next 30 years becoming farming literate? If we can get to the moon and back with all of our intelligence, skill and wisdom, we can grow soil, and this living sponge cake can grow healthy food for us plus good compost materials to enrich our soils. Newsweek magazine once called the soil produced by biologically intensive food raising the sakatoti, or rich high-quality pastry, of gardening. We may think this is impossible, yet an early Stone Age culture in northern Iran 10,000 years ago grew its calorie needs in just 20 hours a year, 20 minutes a day for 60 days according to anthropologists. Let's give ourselves a full handicap and work on rediscovering how to grow all our food in just 100 hours a year per person. How can we live better on fewer resources? It is possible. Why not begin now and avoid the rush? The history and philosophy of the grow biointensive method. The grow biointensive method of horticulture is a quiet, vitally alive art of organic gardening that links people with the whole universe, a universe in which each of us is an interwoven part of the whole. People find their place by relating and cooperating in harmony with the sun, air, rain, soil, moon, insects, plants, and animals rather than by attempting to dominate them. All of these elements will teach us their lessons and do the gardening for us if we only watch and listen. We become gentle shepherds providing the conditions for plant growth. Biologically intensive farming dates back to 4,000 years ago in China, 2,000 years in Greece, and 1,000 years ago in Latin America. In fact, the Mayan culture grew food this way at their homes on a neighborhood basis. This is one of the reasons their culture survived when others around them were collapsing. The grow biointensive method is a combination of two forms of horticulture practiced in Europe during the 1800s and early 1900s. French intensive techniques were developed in the 1700s and 1800s outside Paris. Crops were grown on 18 inches of horse manure, a fertilizer that was readily available. The crops were grown so close to each other that when the plants were mature, their leaves would barely touch. The close spacing provided a miniclimate and a living mulch that reduced weed growth and helped hold moisture in the soil. During the winter, glass jars were placed over seedlings to give them an early start. The gardeners grew up to 9 crops each year and could even grow melon plants during the winter. Biodynamic techniques were developed in the early 1920s by Rudolf Steiner, a brilliant Austrian philosopher and educator. His work began after the introduction of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. Initially, only nitrogen fertilizers were used to stimulate growth. Later, phosphorus and potassium were added to strengthen the plants and to minimize disease and insect problems. Eventually, trace minerals were added to the chemical larder to round out the plant's diet. The single, physical nutrients in soluble salt forms in chemical fertilizers were not complete and vital meals for the plants, causing imbalances that attracted disease and insects. These fertilizers caused chemical changes in the soil that damaged its structure, killed beneficial microbiotic life, and greatly reduced its ability to make nutrients already in the air and soil available to the plants. Steiner noticed that the number of crops affected by disease and insect problems increased while nutritive value and yields dropped. Steiner traced the cause of these problems to the use of the newly introduced synthetic chemical fertilizers and pesticides. He returned to the gentler, diverse, and balanced diets of organic fertilizers as a cure for the ills brought on by synthetic chemical fertilization. He stressed the holistic growing environment for plants, their rate of growth, the synergistic balance of their environments and nutrients, their proximity to other plants, and their various companion relationships. And he initiated a movement to scientifically explore the relationships that plants have with each other. The biodynamic method also brought back raised planting beds. 2,000 years ago, the Greeks had noticed that plant life thrives in landslides. The loose soil allows air, moisture, warmth, nutrients, and roots to properly penetrate the soil. The curved surface area between the two edges of the landslide bed provides more surface area for penetration and interaction of the natural elements than a flat surface. The simulated landslides or raised beds used by biodynamic gardeners were usually 3 to 6 feet wide and of varying lengths. Between the 1920s and the 1930s, Alan Chadwick, an Englishman, combined the biodynamic and French intensive techniques into the biodynamic or French intensive method. The United States was first exposed to the combination when Mr. Chadwick brought the method to the Fracker Organic Student Garden at the University of California's Santa Cruz campus in the 1960s. Chadwick, a horticultural genius as well as an avid dramatist and artist, had been gardening for half a century. He had studied under Rudolf Steiner, the French gardeners, and as a gardener for the Union of South Africa. The site he developed at Santa Cruz was on the side of a hill with poor soil with high clay content. Only poison oak grew well in this area. Chadwick and his apprentices removed the poison oak with pickaxes and created a rich soil in 2 to 3 years by hand. A true Garden of Eden grew from Chadwick's vision and hard work. Barren soil was made fertile through extensive use of compost, with its life-giving humus. The humus produced a healthy soil that grew healthy plants less susceptible to disease and insect attacks. The many nuances of a biodynamic French intensive method, such as transplanting seedlings into a better soil each time a plant is moved and sowing by the phases of the moon, were also used. The results were beautiful flowers with exquisite fragrances and tasty vegetables of high quality. In 1971, Larry White, director of the Nature and Science Department for the city of Palo Alto, invited Stephen Kafka, senior apprentice at the university's garden, to give a 4-hour class on the biodynamic French intensive method gardening. Members from a local, young non-profit environmental research and education organization, Ecology Action, attended the class and recognized that the time was ripe. The city had made land available to the public for gardening 2 years before. Citizens were interested in learning how to grow food and garden, and they were inspired by the local Eden that had been created at the university. Aside from a tour apprentice program at Santa Cruz and periodic classes given by Alan Chadwick or Stephen Kafka, training in biointensive was not available to the public. Neither detailed public classes nor yield research were being conducted regularly anywhere. In January 1972, the Board of Directors approved a project that would include a research garden, the Common Ground Garden, to teach regular classes, collect data on the reportedly high yields by the environmentally sound biointensive method, make land available for gardening to additional mid-peninsula residents, and publish information on the method's techniques. Instructed by Alan Chadwick and Stephen Kafka, Ecology Action members began teaching their own classes in the spring of 1972 on a 3/3 acre plot belonging to the Syntex Corporation in the Standard Industrial Park offered to Ecology Action. How to Grow More Vegetables, originally only 96 pages, sprouted from clamors for information. Ecology Action began to investigate what agricultural techniques would make food raising by small farmers and gardeners more efficient. The concept of mini-farming began to be developed. In 1980, Ecology Action lost the lease to the site in Palo Alto. A new common ground mini-farm was inaugurated in Willits, California. The facilities of grocery store and electric lines were exchanged for open skies and room to grow more herbs, flowers, vegetables, beans, grains, and compost crops than we ever imagined. The site offered a permanent site to grow trees of all kinds for food, fuel, and beauty. It also owes a place to grow. A world-class library, housing and office space graced the current site. The infrastructure has grown over time to lend itself to short-term and long-term training programs. Every year, hundreds of people visit the site on scheduled tours and through workshops. Interns from around the world study in the 6-month training program. They play a key role in documenting data from the 100-bed-plus research garden within a myriad of experiments. Research continues on quantitative aspects as listed above, but has also deepened in areas related to diet and compost design. For example, what crops can produce calories and compost? What is the smallest size of land that one needs to produce an entire diet sustainably? What income-generating strategies are possible in the small scale? What are the best strategies for establishing a biointensive garden while inputting the minimum of external nutrients? In 1999, Ecology Action coined the term Grow Biointensive to differentiate its work from other biointensive initiatives. Over the course of time, biointensive had come to refer to many practices, some involving chemical approaches. Ecology Action looked to distinguish its work from these initiatives and highlight its work in designs that involved the miniaturization of agriculture in a closed system. How to use this book? Alan Chadwick advised, just grow one small area, and do it well. Then, once you have it right, grow more. The genius of these guiding words should form the backbone of your learning. One of the advantages of How to Grow More Vegetables is that it describes a complete general approach to gardening. Another is that it lets you start small and build your skill as a gardener over the years. Bed preparation, fertilization, composting, seed propagation, transplanting, watering, and weeding are performed essentially the same way for all crops. The principal difference among crops is seedling at and growing bed space recommendations. Spacing recommendations are found in columns M, E and I in the master charts which begin on this page. As you become familiar with different crops and their personalities, you will see other nuances. However, the principal work will have been done to build a framework for your sustainable food growing. So, once you know how to grow lettuce, you know most of the basics for growing onions, tomatoes, wheat, apple trees, and even cotton. If you are a beginning gardener or mini-farmer reading How to Grow More Vegetables, you will likely concentrate on learning basic techniques of bed preparation, compost making, and close space planting. You may want to concentrate on planting seedlings that have already been started at a local nursery. Starting your own seedlings requires a higher skill level, and you may want to wait to try it until your second or third year. Your use of the master charts in Chapter 8 will likely concentrate in column M, which gives in-bed spacing of plants. If you are an intermediate gardener, we recommend that you use more of the tables and charts to grow seedlings, compost crops, grains, and fruit trees. We hope that you will become fascinated with producing soil fertility crops, carbon and calorie crops, in your own garden as a way to feed your soil and yourself. A fully experienced food grower takes about 10 years in the garden. You will be able to draw on all of the information provided in this book as you work on growing most or all of your family's food at home, or teach others the skills you have already mastered. Throughout the learning process, we recommend that carbon and calorie crops, see this page, should occupy an increasing part of your garden throughout your learning process. Carbon and calorie crops feed the soil as well as ourselves. Examples include corn, millet, wheat, oats, barley, cereal rye, and amaranth. These crops grow a lot of carbonaceous material for the compost pile, which in turn feeds the soil with humus, as well as providing a great deal of nutritious food. For more information, see Chapter 8 in particular. Information about these dual-purpose crops, which provide both dietary calories and compost materials, is included in the Master Charts section beginning on this page, as well in the Compost Crops sections of Ecology Action's self-teaching mini-series, booklets 14, 15, 25, 26, 28, 34, 35, and 36. How to Grow More Vegetables provides you with everything that you need to create a garden symphony, from the basic techniques to advanced planning skills for a beautifully planted backyard homestead. Each of us can revitalize ourselves, the soil, and the earth one small growing area at a time. Before we know it, we will all live on a thriving, vibrant earth consisting of personal and community mini-preserves, re-established with health as a vital, dynamic whole. The real excitement is that each of us will never know everything. After 50 years of gardening, Alan Chadwick exclaimed, "I am still learning." And so we are all. In fact, while the universal scientific principles operate within sustainable mini-farming's biological systems, our gardening results change each year. As we explore, we will come to understand the underlying principles, and a whole new world will unfold. We will be able to make changes to improve the health, fertility, effectiveness, and sustainability of the way we farm for an even better life on this planet. This latest revision includes new material to make your job easier, key clarifications in the compost and seed propagation chapters, crop rotation information, improved techniques, understandings, and approaches, corrected and updated master charts and planning data, a whole new organization of the 8 key concepts, a reorganization of the most accessible bibliography. The edition represents 40 years of working with plants, soils, and people in virtually all climates and soils around the world. We each have a lifetime of growing before us, and the opportunity to continually improve our understanding of the living canvas we are painting. Many more people are becoming involved in home food raising and mini-farming as a result of peak oil challenges, as well as for a love of nature and working with a soil teeming with life. Start now with just one raised growing bed. Self-reliance in your own food shed will make all the difference in the world. Each one of us has tremendous potential to heal the earth. Let us begin. As Gandhi observed, to forget how to dig the earth and tend the soil is to forget ourselves. In Candide, Voltaire points the way. The whole world is a garden, and what a wonderful place this would be, if only each of us took part of our part of the garden. Each of us is needed. Building a truly sustainable agriculture is an essential part of building sustainable communities. As we build soils, we also build a culture made of healthy living and effective farming, as well as enduring communities. In order to accomplish these goals, we need to shift our agricultural perspective. We need to stop growing crops and start growing soil. Granted, in order to grow soil, we need to grow crops. But rather than growing crops for the sole purpose of consumption, the goal changes to one of giving and creating life-producing soil, and in the process, an abundance of food. We must begin by educating ourselves, then sharing what we have learned by teaching people to understand the importance of growing soil. Life makes more life, and we have the opportunity to work together with this powerful force to expand our own vitality and that of this planet. Join us in this exploration. Despite its worldwide impact, Ecology Action has remained a small impact, Ecology Action has remained a small organization, believing that small is effective and human. We consider ourselves to be a catalyst. Our function is to empower people with the skills and knowledge necessary to enable them to improve their lives and thus transform the world into a garden of health and abundance. The message is to live richly in a simple manner in a way we can all enjoy. You can assist Ecology Action in this work by finding 5 friends and getting them involved in grow biointensive sustainable mini-farming and or other sustainable food raising practices. 4. Together we can make a significant difference in the world, one small area at a time. This is our opportunity. It is fun to be part of the whole picture and part of the long-term world environmental solution. Endnotes. 1. Developed from U.S. Department of Agriculture Statistics. 2. Developed from P. Bering, Availability of Agricultural Land for Crop and Livestock Production, in D. Pimentel and C.W. Hall, eds. Food and Natural Resources, San Diego, Academic Press, 1989, p. 6983, as noted in Natural Resources and an Optimum Human Population, David Pimentel et al. Population and Environment, A Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies, Volume 15, Number 5, May 19, 94, and with statistics from the United Nations. 3. IBID. 4. To help accelerate this process, in the last 20 years Ecology Action has taught 1,855 participants at introductory 3-day workshops from 47 states and the District of Columbia, plus 29 countries, and initiated a self-teaching section on its website www.growbiointensive.org. Nothing happens in living nature that is not in relation to the whole. Go T. 1. Deep soil creation and maintenance. Goal: develop soil structure so the plants will have a living sponge cake in which to thrive. Proper step in structure facilitates proper soil and nutrients allow uninterrupted and healthy plant growth. Loose soil with good nutrients enables roots to penetrate the soil easily, and a steady stream of nutrients can flow into the stem and leaves. How different from a situation in which a plant is transferred from a flat with loose soil and proper nutrients into a hastily prepared backyard plot or a chemically stimulated field. The plant suffers not only from the shock of being uprooted, but also from an environment where it is difficult to grow. The growth is interrupted and the roots have difficulty getting through the soil and obtaining food. As a result, the plant produces more carbohydrates and less protein than usual. This imbalance attracts insects. A debilitating cycle can begin that ends in the use of pesticides which kill soil life and make the plants even less healthy. Fertilizers are then used in an attempt to boost the plant's health. Instead, the fertilizers destroy more soil life, damage the soil's structure further, and lead to even less healthy plants that attract more insects and need more toxic medicines in the form of additional pesticides and fertilizers. Well-documented reports tell us that a wide variety of commercial pesticides kill beneficial invertebrate predators while controlling pest populations. These pesticides exterminate earthworms and other invertebrates that are needed to maintain soil fertility. The pesticides also destroy microorganisms that provide symbiotic relationships between the soil and plant root systems. We propose striving for good soil health in the first place, starting with the preparation of the soil and easier soil preparation next time. The initial preparation and planting a raised bed, a time investment of as much as 6.5 to 11 hours to dig and transplant a 100 square foot bed. If you are lucky enough to have loose soil, the time commitment will be much less. The time invested pays off with increased yields and healthier soil and plants. As you become more skilled at double digging, the time invested is greatly reduced. Often a 100 square foot bed can be done in 2 hours or less. We estimate that only 4 to 6.5 hours should be required on an ongoing basis for the entire bed preparation and planting process as the soil develops better structure over time with correct care and compost. Beds versus rows. The planting rows usually made by gardeners and farms today are only a few inches wide with wide spaces in between. The plants have difficulty growing in these rows due to the extreme penetration of air and the greater fluctuations in temperature and moisture content. During irrigation, water floods the rows, immerses the roots in water, and washes soil away from the rows and upper roots. Consequently, much of the beneficial microbiotic life around the roots and soil, which is so essential to disease prevention and to the transformation of nutrients into forms that plants can use, is destroyed and may even be replaced by harmful organisms. About 3/4 of the beneficial microbiotic life inhabits the upper 6 inches of the soil. After the water penetrates the soil, the upper layers dry out and microbial activity is severely curtailed. The rows are then more subject to wide temperature fluctuations. Finally, to cultivate and harvest, people and machine trundle down the trough between the rows, compacting the soil and the roots, which eat, drink, and breathe, a difficult task with someone or something standing on the equivalent of your mouth and nose. Getting started. Correct tools. We recommend investing in quality tools from the beginning. Poor tools will wear out or tire you out while you are preparing your garden area. For all-round ease, D-handled flat spades and D-handled spading forks of good temper should be used for bed preparation. D-handles allow you to stand straight with the tool directly in front of you. A long-handled tool means that you must hold it at your side. This position does not allow for a simple, direct posture. Most people find that D-handled tools are less tiring. However, people with back problems may need long-handled tools. In fact, anyone with chronic pain or other health problems should check with their physician before proceeding with the physically active process of double digging. The flat spade has a particular advantage in that it digs equally deep all along its edge rather than in a pointed V pattern. The flat edge is preferable as all points in the bed should be dug to an equal depth. The blade on the flat spade also goes into the soil at less of an angle and without the usual shovel's curve. Therefore, the sides of the bed can be dug perpendicular or even diagonally outward into the path, a plus for root penetration and water flow. For seed propagation, the proper tools will make the work easier and more productive. Hand fork dibber transplanting trowel. For soil preparation, D-handled flat spade, D-handled spading fork, standard shovel, D-handled spade, hula hoe, bow rake, 5/6 length. The 39-inch long spades and forks are generally for people 5'5" or shorter, 43-inch long tools are for people 5'6" or taller. A 5 to 8 inch thick plywood board, 2 to 3 feet long by 3 to 5 feet wide, serves as a digging board to stand on. The size of the board will depend on your height and the width of the bed. Treat the board with linseed oil to protect it against soil moisture. This board will distribute your weight over the bed as you dig or work on the bed. A bow rake, preferably 5 feet 6 inches in length, makes leveling and forming the bed easy. A hula hoe is the perfect tool for cultivating the upper 2 to 4 inches of soil. Laying out your beds. Carefully choose a place for your raised beds that has access to water and sunlight, preferably 7 to 11 hours of direct sunlight each day. To begin, mark out a bed 3 to 5 feet wide and at least 3 feet long. A 3 foot by 3 foot space assures a minimum miniclimate. Most people prefer beds to be 5, 10 or 20 feet long, as it makes calculating easier. The maximum length should be determined by ease of work. Consider your source of compost. Ideally, you will have compost that you have prepared available as you begin to prepare your beds. However, many decide to purchase compost or aged manure to begin. For this initial application of organic matter, one may consider aged manure. While compost is preferable, if one chooses aged manure, assure that it is 2-year-old steer or cow manure, or 2-year-old horse manure that originally contained a lot of sawdust, or 2-month-old horse or chicken manure not containing much sawdust. The best time to double dig the soil is in early morning or evening in spring or autumn. The air temperature is cooler at these times, so less soil organic matter is lost in the process. Dig only when the soil is evenly moist. It is easier and also better for the soil. Digging a hard, dry soil breaks down the structure, and it is difficult to penetrate. Wet soil is heavy and easily compacted. Compaction destroys friable structure and minimizes aeration. These conditions kill microbiotic life. Correct soil moisture can be determined by a simple hand test. Soil is too dry for digging when it is loose and will not hold its shape after being squeezed in the palm of your hand, in cases of sands or loams, or when it cannot be penetrated by a spade. In the case of clays, soil is too wet when it sticks to the spade as you dig. The goal of double digging is to loosen the soil to a depth of 24 inches below the surface. The first year, you may only be able to reach 15 to 18 inches with reasonable effort. Be satisfied with this result. Do not injure yourself or your tools. More important than reaching 24 inches in the first years is improvement over the course of time. Nature, the loosened soil, worms, and plant roots will further loosen the soil with each crop, so digging will be easier each year and the depth will increase over time. Be patient in this soil building process. It takes 5 to 10 years to build up a good soil, and one's skills. Actually, this is very rapid. Nature usually requires a period of 3,000 years or more to build the 6-inch layer of farmable soil needed to grow a good crop of food. After the soil has been initially prepared, you will find that the grow biointensive method requires less work per unit of food produced than the gardening technique you presently use. The Irish call this the lazy bed method of raising food. Proper soil structure and nutrients allow uninterrupted and healthy plant growth. Types of deep soil preparation. The double dig is the principal way one prepares a bed until good structure is established. Afterwards, one will depend on surface cultivating the top 2 to 4 inches. Another way to keep soil loose between double digging is to single dig, loosening the top 12 inches with the spading fork. We recommend doing so between crops in the same growing year. Selected vegetable root systems shown in scale. General double digging procedure. Each year before the main crop until good soil structure is established. Spread a layer of compost over the entire area to be dug. After marking the bed, place the digging board on the bed, leaving approximately 24 inches from the end of the bed for the first trench. Remove 7 5-gallon buckets of soil from the upper level of the first trench, assuming a 5-foot wide growing bed. See illustration on this page. Be sure to dig trenches across the width of the bed. This will give you 3 buckets of soil to make compost. These will eventually be returned to the growing beds in the form of cured compost, 1 bucket of soil to make flat soil to grow seedlings, and the remaining 3 buckets are returned to the bed after it is dug. The initial double dig process, step by step. 1. Spread a layer of compost over the entire area to be dug. Compost is added after the double dig and bed shaping for basic ongoing double digs. See this page. 2. Using a spade, remove the soil from a trench 1 foot deep and 1 foot wide across the width of the bed and put the soil into buckets or a wheelbarrow for use in making compost and flat soil. If the bed is 5 feet wide, the soil will fill 7 5-gallon buckets. The trench is being dug across the width of the bed. 3a. Loosen the soil an additional 12 inches with a spading fork by digging the tool into its full depth and then pushing the tool handle downward so the fork tines will lever through the soil, loosening and aerating it. See following illustrations for loosening compacted soil. 3b1. For compacted soil, while standing in the trench, loosen the soil an additional 12 inches with a spading fork by digging in the tool to its full depth and lifting out a tight soil section on the fork pan. 3b2. Then, by moving your arms upward in a small jerk, the soil will break apart as it falls downward, hits the fork tines, and falls into the hole below. Now, standing in the trench or on the digging board above the trench, dig down another 12 inches, or as deep as possible, with a spading fork, a few inches at a time if the soil is heavy or tight. Leave the fork as deep as it has penetrated, and loosen the subsoil by pushing the fork handle down and levering the tines through the soil. If the soil is not loose enough for this process, lift the chunk of soil out of the trench on the fork tines. Then throw it slightly and gently upward, and allow it to fall back on the tines so it will break apart some. If this does not work, use the points of the fork tines to break the soil apart. Work from one end of the trench to the other in this manner. Next, move back the digging board, approximately the 12-inch width of the next trench. Dig another trench behind the first one, moving each spadeful of the top 12 inches of soil forward into the first trench. When digging, make as few motions and use as little muscle as possible in this process. This will conserve your energy and involve less work. In fact, as you dig the soil, you will discover you can use a naked-o-like economy of motion and energy in which you are virtually just shifting your balance and weight rather than digging. Sometimes you will have to work over a trench a second or third time to remove all the soil and obtain the proper trench size. Repeat the subsoil loosening process in the second trench. 4. Dig out the upper part of a second trench 1 foot deep and 1 foot wide. Move each spadeful of soil forward into the first trench, mixing the soil layers as little as possible. Dig a third trench, and so on, until the entire bed has been double dug. It helps to level the soil with a rake every 3 to 4 trenches during the digging process. If you do not, you may end up with a very deep trench at the end of the bed. Then you will have to move a large amount of soil from one end of the bed to the other to even it out when you are ready to be finished. This action also causes a disproportionate misplacing of topsoil into the subsoil area. When you are sliding the soil forward from one trench into another, notice a couple of things. If you spread compost on the bed before beginning, note that some of the layer slides 3 to 6 inches down into the trench, creating a small mound of soil or landslide. This approximates the way nature adds leaves, flower bodies, and other decaying vegetation to the top of the soil, where they break down and their essences percolate in the soil. Always make sure that the upper layer of soil, the top 12 inches, is not turned over during the double dig. Most of the microbiotic life live in the upper 6 inches of the soil. Also, the natural layering of the soil that is caused by rainfall and leaching, leaf litter, temperature, gravity, and other natural forces is less disturbed when the soil is not generally mixed, even though the soil is loosened up and distributed somewhat. Aim for a balance between nature's natural stratification and the loosened landsliding soil. As a goal, strive not to mix the soil layers. Even though some mixing will occur, it is important to avoid excessive disruption of the soil layers. When you are through double digging, the aerated surplus soil in the bed will be enough to fill the final trench at the end of the bed. You may also add some of the buckets from the first trench. If you add compost that you have made with soil, that would also contribute soil to the bed. Take buckets of surplus soil to the soil bin pile. Level and shape the bed. Sprinkle on compost and any soil amendments as recommended by your soil test over the surface of the bed. These may include organic nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, calcium and trace mineral fertilizers. For more detail, see this page. Include any pH modifiers, such as special leaf or pine needle compost to make the soil less alkaline, or lime to make the soil less acid, as indicated by your soil test. Sift in compost and fertilizers and pH modifiers only 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. After sifting them in, do no further raking to avoid disturbing the even distribution of fertilizers and compost. Considerations for initial dig with very poor soils. You may choose to add compost at different points for the initial double dig and when working with a soil with very low amounts of organic matter. Instead of applying compost only after the double dig, consider spreading a ½ layer over the bed before double digging and or a ½ layer during the dig by incorporating it thoroughly into the 12-inch deep trench. Bed preparation per 100 square feet. 1. Check the soil moisture. The soil should be evenly moist to facilitate digging, but not saturated. If needed, water the area to be dug. For hard, dry clays that have not ever been cultivated, this may mean up to 2 hours with a sprinkler. Begin next steps when soil is evenly moistened. 2. Loosen 12 inches of soil with a spading fork, and remove any plant cover. 3. Check soil moisture and water again if necessary. If your soil has particularly large clods, consider waiting several days and let nature help do the work. The warm sun, cool nights, wind, and water will help break down the clods. Water the bed lightly every day to aid the process. Optional, one time. At this time, sand may be added to a bed with a clayey soil, or clay to a bed with sandy soil, to improve texture. Normally you should add no more than ½ inch, 4 cubic feet, of sand or clay. More sand may allow water-soluble fertilizers to percolate down too rapidly. Mix the sand or clay thoroughly into the loosened 12 inches of soil with a spading fork. Optional, one time. If the soil is poor, very sandy or very clayey, add on a one-time only basis up to a ½ inch layer, 8 cubic feet, of compost or aged manure. Remove the soil from the upper part of the first trench and place it in a soil storage area for use in making compost and flat soil or to return to the last trench. 4. Loosen the soil an additional 12 inches. Optional, one time. Spread a ½ inch layer of compost on the loosened soil of the first trench. 5. Dig out the upper part of the second trench and move it forward into the first upper trench. 6. Loosen the lower part of the second trench. 7. Continue the double digging process, repeating steps 7 and 8, for the remaining trenches. Rake every 3 to 4 trenches to ensure even bed height. 8. Fill in the final trench. Shape the bed by raking it. Evenly spread compost and any needed fertilizers over the entire area. Sift in compost and any fertilizers 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. Your bed is ready to be transplanted. Types of deep soil preparation. Ecology Action uses 4 basic types of deep soil preparation processes: the initial double dig, the basic ongoing double dig, the complete texturizing double dig, the U-bar dig. The complete texturizing double dig was developed to improve soil quality more rapidly and is used one time only. It is used usually in place of the initial double dig, but it can be used at a later point in time. We have found this soil preparation process greatly improves plant health and yields immediately in poor, compacted, and heavy soil. It is often worth the extra digging time involved. However, it does use an insustainable amount of organic matter. Initial double dig. 1. When the soil is lightly moist, loosen the top 12 inches of the entire area to be dug with a spading fork and remove any weeds. 2. Spread a ½ inch layer of compost over the entire area to be dug, after mixing in a 1 inch layer of sand or clay 12 inches deep. Optional, see this page. 3. Remove the soil from the upper part of the first trench and place it in a soil storage area for use in making compost, flat soil and soil for filling in the final trench, when needed. 4. Loosen the soil an additional 12 inches. 5. Dig out the upper part of the second trench and move it forward into the first trench. 6. Loosen the lower part of the second trench. 7. Continue the double digging process, repeating steps 3, 4, 5, and 6, for the remaining trenches. Rake after each 3 to 4 trenches to ensure even bed height. 8. Fill in the final trench. Shape the bed by raking it. Then evenly spread any needed fertilizers over the entire area and sift them in 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. The double dug bed is now completed. The U-bar dig can be used as a substitute for the ongoing double dig in soil that is in reasonably good shape. This usually means after 1 normal double dig or more. The 18-inch long U-bar tines, see this page, do not prepare the soil as deeply as a spade and a spading fork used to double dig 24 inches deep. but the lower 12 inches of the growing bed compact more slowly over time than the upper 12 inches. Also, the U-bar appears to have the advantage of mixing up the soil strata much less than double digging with a spade and a spading fork. It aerates the soil less, however. This is an advantage in looser, sandier soil and can be a problem in tighter clays. If you use a U-bar regularly, do a normal double dig as often as increased compaction indicates. U-barring is quicker and easier than using a spade and a spading fork, though some knowledge of how your soil is improving, or not improving, is lost with the decreased personal contact with the soil. For detailed plans on how to build a U-bar, see this page or Ecology Action's The Backyard Homestead, Mini Farm and Garden Logbook. At Ecology Action, we prefer to double dig, as we learn more from it and stay more in touch with the soil. Basic ongoing double dig. A primary difference between the ongoing and the initial double dig is that the compost is put on after the digging and shaping process in the ongoing double dig. 1. The bed is shown after harvest, with a slightly raised mound of partially recompacted soil and residual compost. Optional, when the soil is lightly moist, loosen the entire top 12 inches of the area to be dug with a spading fork and remove any weeds. 2. Remove the soil from the upper part of the first trench and place it in a soil storage area for use in making compost, flat soil, and soil for filling the final trench, when needed. 3. Loosen the soil an additional 12 inches. 4. Dig out the upper part of the second trench and move it forward into the first upper trench. 5. Loosen the lower part of the second trench. 6. Continue the double digging process, repeating steps 4 and 5, for the remaining trenches. Rake after each 3 to 4 trenches to ensure even bed height. 7. Fill in the final trench. Shape the bed by raking it. Evenly spread a half-inch layer of compost and any needed fertilizers over the entire area. Sift in compost and any fertilizers 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. Note: after the lower trench has been loosened, potatoes may be placed on its surface on 9-inch centers using offset spacing. See this page. The soil from the next trench's upper level may then be moved forward onto them. This is the easiest way we have found to plant potatoes. Mark the location of the potatoes with stones or sticks in the outside paths before covering them with soil. This will indicate where potatoes should be placed on the surface of each succeeding lower trench. Complete texturizing double dig. One time only for compacted heavy soils. 1. When the soil is lightly moist, loosen the top 12 inches of the entire area to be dug with a spading fork and remove any weeds. 2. Spread a half-inch layer of compost including 50% soil over the entire area to be dug, after mixing in a half-inch layer of sand or clay 12 inches deep, optional, see this page. 3. Thoroughly mix in compost 12 inches deep. 4. Remove the soil from the upper part of the first trench and place it in a soil storage area for use in making compost, flat soil, and soil for filling the final trench, when needed. 5. Loosen the soil an additional 12 inches. 6. Spread a half-inch layer of compost including 50% soil on the loosened soil in the first trench. 7. Thoroughly mix the compost placed on top of the lower first trench into the soil 12 inches deep. 8. Dig out the upper part of the second trench and move it forward into the first trench. 9. Loosen the lower part of the second trench. 10. Spread a half-inch layer of compost including 50% soil on the loosened soil in the second trench. 11. Thoroughly mix in the compost on the lower second trench 12 inches deep. 12. Continue the complete texturizing double digging process, repeat steps 8 through 11, for the remaining trenches. Rake after each 3 to 4 trenches to ensure even bed height. 13. Fill in the final trench. Shape the bed by raking it. Then evenly spread any needed fertilizers over the entire area and sift them in 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. The complete texturizing double-dug bed is completed. U-bar dig. 1. After harvest, weed the entire slightly raised bed if necessary. 2. When the soil is lightly moist, begin U-barring the soil along the length of the bed. No digging board is used. The soil will be loosened 3/4 as deep as in the double dig. 3. Continue U-barring until the bed is done. 2 or 3 U-bar passes along the length of the bed may be necessary depending on the bed's width. The U-bar is about 2 feet wide and loosens the soil 2 to 2.5 feet wide. 4. Break up any remaining large clumps with a spading fork. Shape the bed by raking it. Then evenly spread 1/2-inch layer of compost and any needed fertilizers over the entire area and sift them in 2 to 4 inches deep with a spading fork. Note: see this page on the proper techniques for building and using a U-bar. The U-bar. Remember that applying compost from outside the garden is unsustainable. The amounts needed for applying multiple layers of compost are not typically able to be produced in a garden. Therefore, Ecology Action recommends applying compost before and/or during the double dig only as the initial double dig or a one-time application. As you get high yields, you may even be able to pay back the borrowed compost to its original source. Compost applications will help very sandy or clayey soils to have better structure. However, sometimes food growers decide to add sand or clay to improve the texture. Ecology Action recommends experimenting with a bed a season or 2 before making such a decision. If you choose to add sand or soil, spread a 1/2-inch layer on the bed area before the double dig and mix in thoroughly in the top 12 inches with a spading fork. Prepared beds. Whenever you prepare a bed, after each crop or season, until good structure is created, the 24-inch depth of the bed should be measured from the bed, not from the path surface. Ecology Action prepares the soil between crops with a double or single dig, loosening the first 12 inches of soil with the fork. As your soil improves and the large clods disappear, your bed may not raise as high as initially. Do not worry about this. It is a sign that you and your soil are successful. The goal of double digging is not the height of the bed, but a reasonable looseness and good structure of the soil. Once good structure has been established by double digging, it is preferable to use surface cultivation, the loosening of the upper 2 inches of soil with a cultivating tool such as a hula hoe, for several years, or more. In this way, the developed structure and soil organic matter are better preserved. Soil in the path is subject to compaction, soil in the bed remains loose. One simple way to determine whether our soil has good structure follows. Squeeze a sample of reasonably moist soil firmly in your hand. Then open your hand. If the soil falls apart easily, it does not have good structure. If it holds the shape of your hand even when you press it gently with the fingers of your other hand, it does not have good structure. If the soil breaks apart into small clumps when you press it with your fingers, it probably has good structure. When surface cultivation is used, compost made without soil will be used because soil will not be removed from the bed during the soil preparation process. Whenever the lower soil becomes compacted, the bed may be double dug again to encourage re-establishment of a well-aerated structure. Remember that structure is different from texture. The texture is determined by its basic ingredients: silt, clay, and sand particles. The soil structure is the way these ingredients hold together. With your assistance, sticky threads exuded by microbial life and the roots produced by the plants help to loosen a clay soil and improve a sandy soil. 1. The goal is to create a sumptuous living sponge cake. The loosened soil of the planting bed makes weeding easier. The raised bed. A balance between nature's natural stratification and our loosened landsliding soil. Once the bed is prepared, you will truly appreciate its width. The distance between the tips of your fingers and your nose is about 3 feet when your arm is extended out to the side. Thus a 3 to 5 foot wide bed can be fertilized, planted, weeded, and harvested from each side with relative ease, and insects can be controlled without walking on the bed. A 3 to 5 foot width also allows a good miniclimate to develop under closely spaced plants. You may wish to use a narrower bed, 1/2 to 2/2 feet wide, for plants supported by stakes, such as tomatoes, pole beans, and pole peas, for easier harvesting. Good soil preparation makes fertility possible up to 4 times the productivity per unit of area. Try not to step on the growing beds once they have been prepared. To do so compacts the soil and makes it more difficult for the plants to grow. If the bed must be walked on, use the double digging board. This will displace your weight over a large area and minimize the damage. Plants obtain much of their water and nutrients through the contact of their root hairs with the soil. If they do not develop an abundant supply of root hairs, less water and fewer nutrients are taken in. The root hairs are more numerous and vigorous in looser soil, so keep your soil loose. When weeding, note that the entire weed root usually comes up out of loosened raised bed soil. This is welcome weeding, and if you get all the root, you will not have to weed as often. Also, you do not need to cultivate the soil of raised beds as much as other gardens. The living mulch shade cover provided by mature plants helps to keep the soil surface loose. If the soil compacts between young plants before the miniclimate takes effect, you should cultivate. Note, for different types of ongoing soil cultivation practices to use after soil preparation, refer to the cultivation information sheet in the Gardening Techniques information packet available from Bountiful Gardens at www.bountifulgardens.org. Once this beautifully alive bed is prepared, it should be kept evenly moist until and after planting so the microbiotic life and plants will stay alive. The bed should be planted as soon as possible so the plants can take advantage of the new surge of life made possible by bringing together the soil, compost, air, water, sun, and fertilizers. A good growing bed will often be 2 to 10 inches higher than the soil's original surface. A good soil contains 50% air space. In fact, adequate air is one of the missing ingredients in most soil preparation processes. Increased air space allows for increased diffusion of oxygen, which the roots and microbes depend on, into the soil, and of carbon dioxide, which the leaves depend on, out of the soil. The increased breathing ability of a double-dug bed is a key to improved plant health. Thus, the prepared depth will be as much as 34 inches in clayey soil. A sandy soil will probably not raise as high as clayey soil at first. To prevent erosion and promote more even water saturation in a clay bed with a high rise, create a lip around the top of the bed, see this page. If the bed raises higher than 10 inches as you are double digging, be sure to level it out with a rake as you go along. Otherwise you will end up with a very wide and deep trench at the end of the bed. Then you will have to move a large amount of soil from one end of the bed to the other to even it out when you are tired. This would also cause a disproportionate misplacing of topsoil into the subsoil area. Soil structure. We currently prepare the soil after each crop, except for autumn compost crops. Some people prefer to do this only once each year. As your soil improves and the large clods disappear, your bed may not raise as high as initially. Do not worry about this. It is just a sign that you and your soil are successful. The goal of double digging is not the height of the bed, but the looseness and good structure of the soil. Endnotes 1. For more information on growing soil quality and soil structure, see Table 20.1 Qualitative Soil Health Indicators in U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agriculture Research Service, Soil Quality Test Kit, Washington, D.C., U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agriculture Research Service, 1999, and Fred Magdoff and Harold Van Ness, Building Soils for Better Crops, 2nd edition, Burlington, VT, Sustainable Agriculture Network, 2000. 2. Sustainability. Goal: grow and maintain sustainable soil fertility with sufficient humus in the soil while creating thriving mini-ecosystems. Sustainable soil fertility. Sustainability means living in such a way that there are enough resources to live well in an alive, diverse, thriving environment indefinitely. Sustainability is possible. Individual people, families, and communities accomplish this frequently all around the world. Yet most people find this challenging. Many of us are living on 6 times or more the resources that would be available to each person in the world if the resources were divided up equally. The grandfather keeps sheep, the son keeps goats, the grandson keeps nothing. Richard Bob Baker, My Life, My Trees. The food we purchase is how we farm, or grow, our food. When we purchase food that has been grown with less sustainable practices, these are the types of practice we are encouraging. We often think of sustainability in terms of using non-renewable resources carefully. More important, however, is learning to use renewable resources well. If all the Earth's agriculture became organic tomorrow, it would be wonderful and challenging. A healthier resource-conserving, food-raising, and planetary ecosystem would be possible. However, there would be new challenges to how to manage the renewable resources within the system. The cost of purchasing the cured compost needed to grow food organically would skyrocket because the demand would exceed current supply. It is a reason for which we need to learn how to properly preserve, manage, and develop our renewable resources. Soil, for example, needs a given level of humus, or cured compost, in order to thrive. Therefore, we each need to make sure we grow enough organic matter to properly preserve the renewable resource of soil. For a garden or mini-farm to be sustainable, it must be able to produce sufficient crops to provide the grower with what she or he needs over an indefinite period of time. This is possible only if the mini-farm's soil is kept fertile in a way that relies neither on non-renewable resources, such as petroleum, nor on the nutrients or health of another soil. Most chemical fertilizers and pesticides are created in part from petroleum, which also fuels tractors, processing machinery, and transport vehicles. While organic fertilizers may seem to be a good alternative, their production often relies on another farm's soil being able to produce the raw materials, such as alfalfa, cottonseed, and feed for animals that provide hoof and horn and blood meals. With these materials constantly taken away from the soil that produces them, these soils lose nutrients and eventually become depleted and infertile. When our focus is on harvesting as much as we can from the soil, we forget to give the soil what it needs to remain fertile. We must grow soil in a way that is sustainable. Only then can it continue to provide us with abundant food. If we farm in a way that does not sustain soil fertility, the soil that is currently used functionally to grow crops will soon be depleted. Like a non-renewable resource, it will be used up. The loss of soil nutrients and humus. When soil grows crops, the crops extract nutrients as well as humus from the soil. To maintain the soil's fertility, the nutrients and humus must be replenished. Both of these needs can be met simultaneously when the crop and all other residues from those who consumed the edible portion of the crop are composted and returned to the soil. The cured compost will have almost all of the nutrients that the crop contained and, depending on the crops that are grown, enough humus to replenish the soil's supply. 1. The carbon that left the soil in the form of carbon dioxide will be returned if plants that store large amounts of carbon in their matured bodies, such as corn, amaranth, wheat, and rice, are grown and added to the soil as cured compost. Initially adding nutrients and humus to the soil. Not all soils naturally have all of the nutrients that they need for their optimum health and crop productivity. Deep-rooted crops such as alfalfa and comfrey can be grown to bring up nutrients from below the range of most roots, then composted and added to the topsoil. Additionally, when cured compost is added to the soil, nutrients that were previously unavailable in the soil may be made available by the biogeologic cycle. In this cycle, humic acid, which is produced from the decomposition process and is contained in the cured compost along with the carbonic acid developed around the plant's roots, can increase soil microbial activity, decompose larger minerals, and possibly alter soil pH so that previously unavailable nutrients are made available. However, if the needed nutrients are not in the deeper regions of the soil, They will not be present in the cured compost. In other words, if the nutrients are not present, the cured compost made from plants grown on the nutrients-deficient soil will not contain the deficient nutrients, and the soil will still be unbalanced even after the cured compost is added. Therefore, in some cases, you may need to bring nutrients in the form of organic fertilizers into the mini-farm from the outside. Your goal should be to bring in a minimum of outside organic fertilizers and maintain them cycling in the system through compost. You may also decide to bring carbonaceous materials into the garden or mini-farm in the beginning so sufficient humus can be added to the soil. Humus is the food of soil microorganisms that are responsible for creating good soil structure and soil fertility. It also helps hold the nutrients in the soil. If there is not enough humus, about 4% to 6% organic matter in temperate regions, about 3% organic matter in tropical ones, nutrients that are returned to the soil in the form of cured compost may leach out. 100% sustainability impossible. Some nutrients will escape from the garden or mini-farm, whether from leaching, from rainfall runoff, or from wind picking them up and carrying them away. Although water and wind erosion are usually not a problem when the soil's humus supply is maintained and all of the techniques are used. At the same time, however, nutrients are added naturally to the mini-farm through rainfall, wind, the breakdown of the soil's parental rock material, and the upsoaking of groundwater. With sustainable gardening and mini-farming, the gain in nutrients may eventually near the loss of nutrients and the soil's nutrient balance may be maintained if all nutrients are recycled. According to the second law of thermodynamics, all systems proceed toward a state of entropy or disorder. Therefore, no system, including agriculture, can be sustained indefinitely. At the extreme, all life will cease as we know it when the sun burns out millions of years from now. However, until this happens, we can maintain our soils at a level close to complete sustainability, instead of close to complete insustainability as is now the situation with most agricultural systems. Within a garden or mini-farm, some soil nutrients may not be replenished by natural forces, or the same natural forces may add soil nutrients in excess. In both situations, if proper soil nutrient maintenance is not pursued, the soil may cease to be able to grow significant amounts of crops in a very short period of time. A farmer took up land in Saskatchewan, dug a cellar and built a frame house on top of it, plowed up the prairie and grew wheat and oats. After 20 years he decided the country was no good for farming, for 8 feet of his soil had gone and he had to climb up into his house. Richard Street Bob Baker, My Life, My Trees. The need for up to 99% sustainability. At Ecology Action, we are investigating the components of grow biointensive as possibly one of the quickest, most effective, most resource-conserving, and most ecologically sound ways to replenish and balance soil nutrients. Once the soil's nutrient base has been properly built and balanced, we need to learn how best to maintain those nutrients in our gardens and mini-farms. One promising approach is to grow all of our own compost materials. If we grow sufficient quantities of crops that produce material for compost, our goal is that the resulting cured compost will contain as many of the nutrients that the crops removed from the soil as possible, as well as enough humus to feed the soil microbes and prevent nutrient leaching. In this way, our food-raising area becomes a source rather than a sink of carbon, nutrients, and fertility. The net loss of carbon dioxide, or leakage, from the system is a key concern. Worldwide, the loss of carbon from our soils and plants in the form of harvested trees and their use for fuel is a situation causing increasing problems. Keeping the nutrients within the mini-farm, as well as learning how to minimize the amount of nutrients we need to bring in from the outside, are important tasks if we are to grow all of our food, clothing, and building materials on the 9,000 square feet, or about 1/5 of an acre, that may soon be all that is available to each man, woman, and child living in developing nations. See Appendix 2. Soon we simply will not have the luxury of taking nutrients from one soil to feed another. with about 33 to 49 years worth of topsoil remaining in the world. Learning how to enrich, improve, and maintain soil in a way that is sustainable is of vital importance if we as a species are to survive. If current agricultural systems can only provide food for about a century before the soil is depleted, they clearly are not sustainable. Ancient civilizations sustained their soils to feed large populations for lengthy periods of time. China's soils, for example, remain productive for 4,000 years or more until the adoption of mechanized chemical agricultural techniques that have been responsible, in part, for the destruction of 15% to 33% of China's agricultural soil in the period from 1950 to 1990. Many of the world's great civilizations have disappeared when their soil's fertility was not maintained. Northern Africa, for example, used to be the granary for Rome until overfarming converted it into a desert, and much of the Sahara Desert was forested until it was overcut. Learning from the past and present, the Chinese biologically miniaturized agriculture and grew food organically by closely spacing plants and maintaining soil fertility, using nutrient and carbon-containing compost, for thousands of years without depleting their resources. By 1890, this process enabled the Chinese to grow all the food for one person on about 5,800 to 7,200 square feet, including animal products used at the time. Ecology Action's pursuit of sustainability. When Ecology Action began the Common Ground mini-farm in Willits, California, the soil was so infertile that many carbonaceous compost crops did not grow well. In an effort to improve the soil, so it could grow all of the carbonaceous compost material needed to provide sufficient cured compost, high carbon content compost material, sawdust mixed with nutrient-containing horse manure was imported to the mini-farm. This approach eventually was deemed inappropriate because of the significant importation. Consequently, we limited our compost building to include materials produced by the mini-farm whenever possible. However, because many crops we were testing did not contain much carbon, the mini-farm produced significantly less carbonaceous compost material than was needed to increase and maintain the soil's fertility. Without sufficient cured compost, the soil began losing the humus it had, and its ability to grow sufficient organic matter declined. By 1985, we began to grow more of our own compost material than before and supplemented our supply of carbonaceous compost material with purchased straw and alfalfa for special compost tests, and goat litter, from outside fodder inputs. In order to preserve diversity on Earth, it is important to keep at least half of the Earth's viable land as a natural preserve. Sustainable mini-farming with its high yields and low local resource needs can help make this possible. Today, we are much closer to achieving closed-system soil humus sustainability within the limits of the mini-farm. We rarely import any compost materials from outside the beds, besides weeds from path spaces and kitchen scraps that contain scraps from outside sources. In addition, we are exploring different levels of maintaining sustainable soil fertility. These methods involve using different amounts of cured compost with different corresponding crop yield levels resulting, see Chapter 3. Because we are not currently returning the nutrients in our human urine and manure to the mini-farm's soil, we need to import some organic fertilizers to maintain the nutrient levels and balance in the soil. Over time, the amount and number of fertilizers has decreased significantly as the nutrients are retained and cycled in the compost. For the future, we are exploring ways to safely, effectively, and legally return the nutrients in our waste to the soil from which they came. Our original goal was to produce relevant yield averages with the same amount, or less, of equivalent inputs as conventional agriculture. Today our goal is to eventually produce at least relevant averages with no additional inputs after the soil is built up on a one-time basis. Current goals of understanding and achieving 99% sustainability. Our goals are to understand how a garden or mini-farm can produce all of its own compost material initially without having to import any straw, manure, or other carbonaceous material for the soil's humus sustainability, maintain nutrient sustainability. How to design for your soil's fertility. In order to more easily sustain the fertility of your soil and decrease the space necessary to produce a large percentage or your entire diet in the smallest area, Ecology Action recommends that you maintain approximately 60% of your growing area in carbon and calorie crops that produce large amounts of carbon for compost and that also produce food in the form of significant amounts of calories. Legumes can also be interplanted to produce a mature biomass and fix nitrogen in the soil if they are harvested at 50% flower. 2. Grow approximately 30% in special root diet crops that produce large amounts of calories in limited space per unit of time. Have a maximum of 10% in vegetable crops for additional vitamins and minerals. Up to 3/4 of this area may be planted in income crops if the missing needed vitamins and minerals are provided by 1/4 of the area. See the information on the following pages for details. We hope that these guidelines will make your path to sustainability easier. Remember that the goal is to grow sufficient compost material in your growing space in order to maintain levels of organic matter as well as cycle nutrients. Annual soil tests provide you with the information to monitor your success and direction. The Grow Biointensive Sustainable Mini Farm. Approximate crop area percentages for sustainability: 60-30-10, approximately 40 beds, 4,000 square foot, for one person, 5,000 square foot including paths, if desired. 50% to 75% of the vegetable crops area may be used for income crops. 30% high-calorie root crops, for example potatoes, for maximum calories. 12 beds. 60% carbon and calorie crops, for example grains, for maximum carbon and satisfactory calorie production. 24 beds. 10% of vegetable crops, for example salad crops, for vitamins and minerals. 4 beds. In order to mini-farm sustainably, take these goals into account as you grow compost crops and apply compost. Compost application goal, including 50% soil per 100 square foot, at least annually before main crop, and, if possible, per 4 to 6 month growing season. Notes: application of 1 cubic foot per 100 square foot is not sufficient to prevent minerals from leaching out because the soil will likely lack sufficient organic matter, unless the organic matters were originally high. Compost production will likely increase as a system operates over time and the gardener becomes more adept and experienced and soil conditions improve. Ecology Action's research shows that very few systems on the average will be able to produce more than 4 cubic feet per 100 square foot sustainably. A sustainable mini-farm will apply the compost created from the system that is available. Most area-efficient leeks: 6.6 beds, garlic, 10.8 beds, parsnips, 10.8 beds, sweet potatoes, 11.2 beds, salsify, 11.8 beds, potatoes, 12.2 beds, Jerusalem artichokes, 12.3 beds. Most weight-efficient garlic, 3.6 pounds, sweet potatoes, 5.0 pounds, salsify, 6.5 pounds, potatoes, 6.7 pounds, Jerusalem artichokes, 7.0 pounds, parsnips, 7.1 pounds, leeks, 8.7 pounds. To be considered in vegetable category: area efficient but not weight efficient, weight efficient but not area efficient. Turnips, including tops, 8.8 beds, requires 19.4 pounds per day. Onions, regular, 12.7 beds, requires 14.0 pounds per day, asterisk. Rutabagas, 13.4 beds, requires 14.7 pounds per day. Beans, excluding fava beans, 4.7 pounds, requires 56.8 beds. Peanuts, 0.9 pounds, requires 34.1 beds. Cassava, 3.3 pounds, requires 20.1 beds. Soybeans, 3.8 pounds, requires 58.0 beds. Burdock, 7.3 pounds, requires 17.8 beds. Asterisk assumes 2 crops per year or yields that are 2 times the intermediate level. Note, other root crops such as carrots, beets, mangels, and radishes are neither weight nor area efficient and should likewise be considered as vegetable crops. Vegetable crops, low-calorie producing, low-carbon producing vegetables for vitamins and minerals. The 60-30-10 design ratio was developed after observing the results of theoretical mini-farm designs over 10 years of workshops. We noted that many of the designs were in this range for planning a 40-bed growing area, using 4,000 square feet as a target area to grow a complete diet. A 40-bed growing area is fairly manageable for one person to do part-time, once one's soil and skill are built. We also chose to use 40 beds as a target as many of the world's people only have access to such a limited area. A growing world population will only reduce the available farmable land. The skill of growing all your nutrition sustainably in a reduced area will be invaluable. We offer the ratio as a guiding tool to assist you in creating the initial designs for your growing area. Over the years, we have seen numerous design ratios that work well within the 40-bed design constraint. Below, we offer a series of considerations, clarifications and examples of the 60-30-10 design ratio general aids for planning your diet. Carbon and calorie crops produce high amounts of carbon and significant calories. 3. High-calorie root crops produce a large amount of calories in a limited space. They are area and weight efficient. 5. Vegetable and income crops do not produce a large amount of calories or carbon in a limited space. Grains, wheat, cereal rye, oats, barley, triticale, corn, sorghum, amaranth, quinoa, pearl millet, etc., fava beans, grown to maturity for dry bin and biomass production, sunflowers. 4. Filberts, grapes, eaten in form of raisins. If you chose to eat more carbon and calorie crops, the weight of the food you eat will generally be less per day, but the area needed to grow your diet will generally increase. If you chose to eat more high-calorie root crops, the weight of the food you eat will generally be more, but the area needed to grow your diet will generally decrease. If you choose to eat a diet with a large variety of crops, planning your garden or mini-farm will be more complex as there will be more considerations in terms of phasing crops, harvesting, and preservation. If you grow a lot of non-interplanted legumes, besides fava beans, as part of your diet, they will reduce the weight of the diet you eat, but it will significantly increase the area needed for the growing of your diet, as legumes are not very area efficient for the production of calories. In addition, your design may produce more protein than is optimal for a person to consume. Note, even if, when you become especially skilled at diet design, you choose other ratios of these crops, you will find that the 60-30-10 approach best teaches you the nature and strength of crop. The 40-bed unit is a guideline. In many climates and soils with sufficient water availability, a complete balanced diet may be grown on as few as 25 growing beds and sometimes less, assuming intermediate level yields. In challenging climates with soils lacking water, it may take much more than 40 growing beds. Sustainability Lessons, Biosphere 2, a closed system living project in Arizona during the 1990s, used techniques based on those rediscovered or systematized by Ecology Action. The result, they raised 80% of their food for 2 years within a closed system. Their experience demonstrates that a complete year's diet for one person can be raised on the equivalent of just 3,403 square feet. In contrast, it currently takes commercial agriculture 15,000 to 30,000 square feet to do the same. Moreover, commercial agriculture has to bring in large inputs from other areas and soils just to make this production possible, depleting other soils in the process. To raise all the food for one person in a developing nation takes about 16,000 square feet, given the diets eaten and the food-raising practices used. The Environmental Research Laboratory at the University of Arizona performed the first tests for Biosphere 2, documenting the status of the soil and crop yields over time. In the human diet experiment, all crop tests involved sustainable biointensive crop rotations including grains, legumes, and green manures. All crop residues were returned to the soil after harvest and composting. Dr. Ed Glenn, who conducted the tests, stated, although funding was not available to continue these experiments for the number of years necessary to draw final conclusions, the results support the hypothesis that sustainable food production with few or no outside inputs will not only continue to produce high yields but will improve rather than deplete the organic constituents in the soil. We are excited whenever people and programs adopt grow biointensive practices, but there is still a challenge to be met. Many people are successfully using grow biointensive farming techniques to grow food for nutrition intervention, but few are trying to grow all their calorie food needs on a basis that also feeds the soil adequately. When people say that they are growing their own food, they tend to refer to 5% to 10% of their diet, the vegetables that they can produce during the growing season. Calorie and sustainable soil fertility. Mini farming and gardening is the next step, which needs to be catalyzed by each of us. Ecology Action publications One Circle, the Sustainable Vegetable Garden and the Self-Teaching Mini-Series booklets, deal with growing a complete diet. Once this additional 90% of calorie growing area has been established in the garden and your soil and skill are improved, initially it may take an average of about 15 minutes or less each day per bed to maintain. There has been a great shift in human consciousness since Ecology Action set up its first research garden mini-farm over 40 years ago. This shift occurred because individuals around the world began to realize that although they might not be able to change the world, they could change the way they do things in their own lives. Raising food sustainably in a gentle and conscious manner makes a difference. Once you become skilled, have built up the fertility of your soil, use simple efficient tools such as U-bars and scythes with grain cradles, and, if you choose the most effective crops, you may be able to grow your food in as little as 2 hours a day. In fact, anthropologists tell us that 10,000 years ago, a culture in northern Iran raised one person's calories with just 20 hours of work a year, 20 minutes a day for 60 days. Their staple crop was uncorn hornimanni, early Stone Age wheat, the second most simple wheat and the first spelt wheat. Calories are the most challenging nutritional element to grow in the smallest area with the least labor, and this culture found one solution. Any missing vitamins and minerals can be grown to complement the calories in a relatively small area and amount of time in the form of vegetables and soft fruits. We as humans are part of the Earth's nutrient cycle, just as the plants and animals are. The Earth welcomes us by creating what we need. Trees are a wonderful example. They absorb our carbon dioxide and give us back oxygen to breathe. As we become more aware of and attuned to our place in the circle of life, it will seem natural to plant carbon-producing crops that also produce calories. In this way our crops give life back to the earth that has fed us. As we become more responsible for our place in this exciting nutrient flow, we will want to grow all of our diet. Consider getting together with 5 friends and becoming involved in sustainable mini-farming and or other sustainable food-raising practices. The Mayan culture practiced biologically intensive food-raising as neighborhoods. In such a way we can make a significant difference in the world, one small area at a time. Endnotes. 1. Of course, the nutrients that we eat then pass through our bodies as waste. Recycling human urine is often considered a taboo subject, but it is an area greatly in need of study to be able to recycle those nutrients, in particular, phosphorus, in a safe, legal, and effective way. See Human Waste section in the online bibliography at www.growbiointensive.org for resources on recycling human waste. 2. To grow the nitrogen needed to make a good compost, legumes also need to be planted. One way to achieve additional nitrogen production without increasing space is to interplant. For example, fava beans can be planted among wheat in winter and bush beans with corn in summer. 3. carbon and calorie crops produce at least 15 pounds of mature material per 100 square foot at intermediate yields as well as are weight efficient. 4. Sunflower seeds are very high in fat. To avoid copper toxicity, no more than 0.62 pounds should be eaten per day. 5. As defined by Ecology Action, a crop is considered to be area efficient if the annual area needed for total galleries is 16 beds, 1,600 square foot, or less, assuming grow biointensive intermediate yields. A crop is considered to be weight efficient if 2,400 calories are contained in 9 pounds or less. Give to nature, and she will repay you in glorious abundance. Alan Chadwick. 3. The use of compost and soil fertility. Goal: maximize quality and quantity of cured compost produced per unit of compost built and maximize microbiodiversity. A natural system. In nature, living things die, life bee and plants die on the floors reborn. Both animals and their death allows forest and in meadows to be composted by time, water, microorganisms, sun, and air to produce a soil improved in structure and nutrients. Organic plant growing follows nature's example. Leaves, grass, weeds, prunings, spiders, birds, trees, and plants should be returned to the soil and reused, not thrown away. Composting is an important way to recycle such elements as carbon, nitrogen, magnesium, sulfur, calcium, phosphorus, potash, and trace minerals. These elements are all necessary to maintain the biological cycles of life that exist naturally. All too often we participate instead in agricultural strip mining. Cereal rye roots grow to 6 feet deep. Composting in nature occurs in at least 3 ways. 1. It occurs in the form of manures, which are plant and animal foods composted inside an animal's body, including earthworms, and then further aged outside the animal by the heat of fermentation. Earthworms are especially good composters. Their castings are 5 times richer in nitrogen, 2 times richer in exchangeable calcium, 7 times richer in available phosphorus, and 11 calcium, 7 times richer in available phosphorus, and 11 times richer in available potassium than the soil they inhabit. It occurs in the form of animal and plant bodies that decay on top of and within the soil in nature and in compost piles. 3. And it occurs in the form of roots, root hairs, and microbial life forms that remain and decay beneath the surface of the soil after harvesting. It is estimated that one cereal rye plant in good soil grows 3 miles of hairs a day, 387 miles of roots in a season, and 6,603 miles of root hairs each season. Qualitatively, some people feel that compost made from plants is 4 times better than that made from manure, and that compost in the form of plant roots is twice as good as plant compost. It is interesting that the roots, which have a special relationship with the soil microbes and the soil itself, can weigh 45% to 120% of the above-ground weight of the plants. Compost functions. Compost has a dual function. It improves the structure of the soil. This means the soil will be easier to work, will have good aeration and water retention characteristics, and will be resistant to erosion. Compost also provides nutrients for plant growth, and its organic acids make nutrients in the soil more available to plants. Fewer nutrients leach out in a soil with adequate organic matter. Improved structure and nourishment produce a healthy soil. A healthy soil produces healthy plants better able to resist insect and disease attacks. Most insects look for sick plants to eat. The best way to control insects and diseases in plants is with a living, healthy soil rather than with poisons that kill beneficial soil life. Compost keeps soil at maximum health with a minimum expense. Generally, it is unnecessary to buy fertilizers to be able to grow healthy plants. At first, organic fertilizers may have to be purchased so the soil can be brought to a satisfactory level of fertility in a short period of time. Once this has been done, the soil's health can be maintained with compost, good crop rotation, and the recycling of plant residues into the compost pile. It is important to note the difference between fertilization and fertility. There can be plenty of fertilizer in the soil, and plants still may not grow well. Add compost to the soil, and the organic acids it contains will release the hidden nutrients in a form available to the plants. This was the source of the amazing fertility of Alan Chadwick's garden at Santa Cruz. The process. Compost is created from the decomposition and recombination of various forms of plant and animal life, such as leaves, grass, wood, garbage, natural fiber clothes, hair, and bones. These materials are organic matter. Organic matter is only a small fraction of the total material that makes up the soil, generally between 1% and 8% by weight. Yet organic matter is absolutely essential to the sustenance of soil life and fertility. Organic matter refers to dead plant and animal residues of all kinds and in all stages of breakdown or decay. Inseparable from these decaying dead residues are the living microorganisms that decompose, or digest, them. Microscopic life forms, bacteria and fungi, in the soil produce the recombining process, which creates the warmth in the compost pile. Most of the decomposition involves the formation of carbon dioxide and water as the organic material is broken down. You can monitor the temperature of your compost pile with a compost thermometer. You can also do this by inserting a 1 by 1 inch piece of wood into the pile, removing it periodically and feeling the warmth with your hand. You can judge whether the latest measurement is hotter or cooler than before. As the available energy is consumed, microbial activity slows down, their numbers diminish and the pile cools. Most of the remaining organic matter is in the form of humus compounds. Humus includes the living and dead bodies of microbial life. As humus is formed, nitrogen becomes part of its structure. This stabilizes nitrogen in the soil because the humus compounds are resistant to decomposition. They are worked on slowly by soil organisms, but the nitrogen and other essential nutrients are protected from too rapid solubility and dissipation. Organic matter includes humus and some undecomposed organic matter. Humus also acts as a site of nutrient adsorption, accumulation of nutrients on its surface, and exchange for plants in the soil. The surfaces of humus particles carry a negative electric charge. Many of the plant nutrients such as calcium, sodium, magnesium, potassium, and most trace minerals carry a positive electrical charge in the soil solution and are thereby attracted to and adhere to the surface of humus. Some of the plant nutrients such as phosphorus, sulfur, and the form of nitrogen that is available to plants are not positively charged. Fortunately, a good supply of these nutrients becomes available to the plants through biological transformation in the compost pile and soil. As plant roots grow through the soil in search of nutrients, they feed on the humus. Each plant root is surrounded by a halo of hydrogen ions that are a byproduct of the root's respiration. These ions also carry a positive electric charge. The root actually bargains with the humus, exchanging some of its positively charged hydrogen ions for positively charged nutrient ions stuck onto the surface of the humus. An active exchange is set up between humus and roots, the plants choosing which nutrients they need to balance their own inner chemistry. Therefore, humus is the most reliable plant food, and plants pull off whatever combinations of nutrients they choose from its surface. Grow biointensive practices rely on this natural, continual, slow-releasing biological process for nutrient release to the plants, rather than making available all the season's nutrients chemically at one time. The beauty of humus is that it feeds plants with nutrients that the plants pick up on its surface, and it also safely stores nutrients in forms that are not readily leached. The humus contains much of the remainder of the original nitrogen that was put in the compost pile in the form of grass, kitchen wastes, and so on. The humus was formed by the resynthesizing activity of numerous species of microorganisms feeding off that original garbage. The microorganisms in the soil then continue to feed on the humus after the finished compost is spread on the soil. As the microorganisms feed, the core nutrients in the humus are released in forms available to plant roots. Thus, The microorganisms are an integral part of the humus, and one cannot be found without the other. The only other component of the soil that holds onto and exchanges nutrients with plant roots is clay, but humus can hold onto and exchange a far greater amount of these nutrients. Give back to the soil as much as you have taken and a little bit more, and nature will provide for you abundantly. Alan Chadwick. Soil and other materials in the compost pile. It is important to add soil to your compost pile. The soil contains a good starter supply of microorganisms. It also contains some bacteria of a type that helps stabilize nitrogen in a pile. The organisms help in several ways. Some break down complex compounds into simpler ones the plants can utilize. There are many species of free-living bacteria that fix nitrogen from the air in a form available to plants. Many microorganisms tie up nitrogen surpluses. The surpluses are released gradually as the plants need nitrogen. An excessive concentration of available nitrogen in the soil, which makes plants susceptible to disease, is therefore avoided. There are predaceous fungi that attack and devour nematodes, see this page, but these fungi are only found in large amounts in a soil with adequate humus. Note, the soil for your compost piles comes from the first trench of your double-dug beds. As your bed soil improves, your compost will also improve. Also, the soil in the compost pile becomes like compost. It holds compost juices, microbes, and minerals that would otherwise leach out of the pile. It is one way to get more compost. The microbial life provides a living pulsation in the soil that preserves its vitality for the plants. The microbes tie up essential nutrients in their own body tissues as they grow, and then release them slowly as they die and decompose. In this way, they help stabilize food released to the plants. These organisms are also continuously excreting a whole range of organic compounds into the soil, sometimes described as soil glue. These excretions contribute to the building of the soil's structure. The organic compounds also contain disease-curing antibiotics and health-producing vitamins and enzymes that are integral parts of biochemical reactions in a healthy soil. The use of soil in compost is important, because it enables the pile to hold moisture better, facilitating the decomposition of the pile, contains microbes that enable the pile to decompose more easily, holds many of the nutrient-laden compost juices, keeping them from leaching out. Tip: you will probably want to build some compost without soil for your perennial growing areas. This is because you cannot easily take soil from these areas to build compost piles. Also, the perennial roots will necessitate surface cultivation to an approximately 2-inch depth in most cases. Note that at least 3 different materials of 3 different textures are used in the Grow Biointensive Method compost recipe and in many other recipes. The varied textures will allow good drainage and aeration in the pile. The compost will also have more diverse nutrient content and greater microbial diversity. A pile made primarily of leaves or grass cuttings makes the passage of water and air through the pile difficult without frequent turning because both tend to mat. Good air and water penetration are required for proper decomposition. The layering of the materials further promotes a mixture of textures and nutrients and helps ensure even decomposition. Tip: always be sure to add at least 3 different kinds of crops to your compost piles. Different microbes flourish in specific kinds of crops. The result of this crop diversity is microbe diversity in the soil, which ensures better soil and plant health. Microbe diversity is very important in the growing soil. Many microbes produce antibiotics that help plants resist diseases, and healthy plants have fewer insect challenges. Each microbe tends to have a food preference. Some prefer beet refuse, others wheat straw, and so on. Therefore, a way to maximize microbe diversity in the compost pile is to build your compost pile with a large variety of materials. Locating the pile. Compost piles can be built in a pit in the ground or in a pile above the ground. The latter is preferable, since during rainy periods a pit can fill up with water. A pile can be made with or without a container. We build our compost piles without using containers. They are unnecessary and use wood and metal resources. The pile should optimally be built under a deciduous oak tree. This tree's nature provides the conditions for the development of excellent soil underneath it. And compost is a kind of soil. The second best place for a compost pile is under any other kind of deciduous tree, with the exceptions of walnut and eucalyptus. As a last resort, you can build your pile under evergreen trees or any shady place in your backyard. The shade and windbreak provided by the trees help keep the pile at an even moisture level. The pile should be placed 6 feet away from the tree's trunk so it will not provide a haven for potentially harmful insects. The least expensive type of compost container is homemade. For those who wish to use them, containers can help shape a pile and keep the materials looking neat. The least expensive container is made of 12-foot-long, 3-foot-wide pieces of 1-inch mesh chicken wire with 5 3-foot-long, 1-by-2-inch boards and 2 sets of small hooks and eyes. The boards are nailed along the 2 3-foot ends of the wire and at 3-foot intervals along the length of the wire. The hooks and eyes are attached to the 2-end boards as shown. The unit is then placed as a circle on the ground, the hooks attached to the eyes, and the compost materials placed inside. The materials hold up the circle. After the pile is built, the wire enclosure may be removed and the materials will stay in place. You may now use the enclosure to build another pile, or you may use it later to turn the first pile into if you want to speed up the decomposition process. We rarely try to accelerate this natural process. Some other kinds of compost piles: pallet type, modular box type, open pile type, large wire fabric type. Note: there are more than 6 billion microbial lifeforms in only 1 level teaspoon of cured compost, almost the number of people on Earth. Size and timing. A minimum compost pile size of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, 1 cubic yard of lightly moist, built compost, weighing about 1,000 pounds, is recommended. In colder climates, a minimum compost pile size of 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet will be needed to properly insulate the heat of the composting process. Smaller piles fail to provide the insulation necessary for appropriate heating, up to 140 degrees F, and allow too much air to penetrate. It is alright to build up piles slowly to this size as materials become available, though it is best to build an entire pile at one time. A large compost pile might be 4 feet high, 5 feet wide, and 10 feet long. A pile will cure to 1/3 to 1/4 of its original size, depending on the materials used. Cross-section of a grow bio-intensive compost pile. The best time to prepare compost is in the spring or autumn, when biological activity is highest. Too much heat or cold slows down and even kills the microbial life in the pile. The 2 high activity periods conveniently coincide with the maximum availability of materials in the spring, as grass and other plants begin to grow rapidly, and in the autumn, as leaves fall and other plant life begins to die. Compost built at other times will simply cure more slowly. Key organic matter functions. 1. Organic matter feeds plants through nutrient exchange and through nutrient release upon its decomposition. 2. It is a continual slow-release source of nutrients for plants. 3. Organic acids in humus help dissolve minerals in the soil, making the mineral nutrients available to plants. Organic acids also increase the permeability of plant root membranes and therefore promote the plant root's uptake of water and nutrients. 4. Organic matter is the energy source for the soil's microbial lifeforms, which are an integral part of soil health. In 1 gram of humus-rich soil there are several billion bacteria, 1 million fungi, 10 to 20 million actinomycetes, and 800,000 algae. 5. The microbes that feed on organic matter in the soil temporarily bind the soil particles together. The fungi, with their thread-like mycelia, are especially important. They literally sew the soil together. The microbes secrete compounds into the soil as they live, metabolize, and ultimately decompose. Their secretions are a bacterial glue, polysaccharides, that hold soil particles, thus improving the soil's structure. Structure is vital to soil productivity because it ensures good aeration, good drainage, good water retention, and erosion resistance. 6. Organic matter is the key to soil's structure, keeping it safe from severe erosion and keeping it in an open, porous condition for good water and air penetration. Building the pile. The ground underneath the pile should be loosened to a depth of 12 inches to provide good drainage. Next, lay down roughage, brush, tree prunings, cardoon stalks, or other woody materials, 3 inches thick, if available, for air circulation. One recipe for grow biointensive compost is, by volume, 45% mature, dry, material, 45% immature, green, vegetation, including kitchen wastes, and 10% soil. Each layer should be watered well as it is created. This 45-45-10 recipe will give you a carbon to nitrogen ratio in your built compost pile of about 30:1, and will produce compost with a significant amount of high-quality, short-term humified carbon. The result will be a hotter, thermophilic 113 degree to 149 degree F pile with faster releasing cured compost that generally releases nutrients over a 3-month to 2-year period. A lot of the carbon in this type of compost pile is lost, however, and the resulting cured compost only contains about 1/3 to 1/3 the cured organic matter that a cooler, mesophilic 50 degree to 113 degree F, 60:1 compost pile will produce. A 60:1 pile is built with approximately 8 parts mature material to 2 parts green vegetation, including kitchen wastes, and 1 part soil. The result of this pile will be a slower releasing cured compost that generally releases nutrients over a 3-month period, and up to 5,000 years, especially if the mature materials contain a large amount of lignin, such as corn and sorghum stalks. This can be a way to build up your soil fertility on a long-term basis, but the more readily available nutrients in the cured compost from a 30:1 pile will be important for the good growth of most vegetables. We make separate compost piles of small tree branches, since they can take 2 years or more to decompose. The materials should optimally be added to the pile in 1 to 2 inch layers with the mature vegetation on the bottom, the immature vegetation and kitchen wastes second, and the soil third, in a 1/4 to 1/2 inch layer. You can, however, build a pile spontaneously, adding materials daily or so, as they become available. This kind of pile will usually take a little longer to cure, but can be built more easily. Mature vegetation is high in carbon content. It is difficult for the microbes in the compost pile to digest carbon without sufficient amounts of nitrogen. Unless you have a large household, it may be necessary to save your kitchen scraps in a tight-lidded unbreakable container for several days to get enough material for the kitchen waste layer. You may want to hold your breath when you dump them because the stronger-smelling anaerobic form of the decomposition process has been taking place in the closed container. The smell will disappear within a few hours after reintroducing air. All kitchen scraps may be added except meats and sizable amounts of oily salad scraps. Be sure to include bones, tea leaves, coffee grounds, eggshells, and citrus rinds. Always be sure to cover kitchen waste with soil to avoid flies and odors. Add the soil layer immediately after the immature material and kitchen waste. It contains microorganisms that speed decomposition, keeps the smell down to a minor level, and prevents flies from laying eggs in the garbage. The smell will be difficult to eliminate entirely when waste from members of the cabbage family is added. In a few days, however, even this soil-minimized odor will disappear. Soil is added to a compost pile after a layer of immature vegetation and kitchen waste. Watering the pile. As each layer is added, water it thoroughly so the pile is evenly moist like a wrung damp sponge that does not give out excess water when squeezed. Sufficient water is necessary for the materials to heat and decompose properly. Too little water results in decreased biological activity, and too much simply drowns the aerobic microbial life. Water the pile, when necessary, as you water your garden. The particles in the pile should glisten. During the rainy season, some shelter or covering may be needed to prevent waterlogging and the less optimal anaerobic decomposition that occurs in a waterlogged pile. The conditions needed for proper functioning of a compost pile and those required for good plant growth in raised beds are similar. In both cases, the proper mixture of air, soil nutrients, structure, microorganisms, and water is essential. Compost curing and application rates. Usually, a compost pile needs one turning to adjust the moisture level and make the mixture more homogeneous for complete breakdown. This should be done at about the 3-week point, after the temperature of the compost pile has peaked and fallen. A decrease in moisture usually occurs at the same time. The color begins to change to brownish from the original green and yellow, and the compost's odor begins to change from musty to an earthy, freshly plowed soil aroma. The compost will normally be ready about 2 months later. Compost does not necessarily need to be turned. If you do not, the pile takes longer to cure, but you will probably produce more cured compost per unit of built material. This is because less oxidation may occur compared to when you turn the pile. If you turn the compost frequently, you will have cured compost faster, but may produce less cured compost per unit of built material. Compost is ready to use when it is dark and rich looking and it crumbles in your hands. The texture should be even, and you should not be able to discern the original source of materials. Mature compost even smells good like water in a forest spring. A bio-intensive pile should be ready in 3 to 6 months. 3. Parts of a regular compost pile that have not broken down completely by the end of the composting period should be placed at the bottom of a new pile. This is especially true for twigs and small branches that can use the extra protection of the pile's height to speed up their decomposition in a situation of increased warmth and moisture. In the garden, a maximum maintenance dressing of ½ inch of compost should be added to the soil annually before the main crop, and, if possible, before each additional 4 to 6 month crop. Guidelines for general maintenance dressings are 1/8 to ½ inch layer of compost, 1 to 4 cubic feet per 100 square feet, if available. Notes: when you turn a compost pile, make the base of the new pile smaller than the original base to give the turned pile more internal volume and less surface area. If you are not ready to use your compost when it is fully cured, stop watering it and spread it out to dry. See Ecology Action's Booklet 32. Compost sifted through ½ inch wire fabric is less likely to attract root hair-eating symphylans. For an easy sifter, see Ecology Action's The Backyard Homestead, Mini Farm and Garden Logbook. Composting methods compared. The bio-intensive method of making compost differs in particular from the biodynamic method in that the bio-intensive method is simpler, normally uses no manure, and usually uses no herbal solutions to stimulate microorganism growth. 4. Manure, used continually and in large amounts in biodynamic compost piles, is an imbalanced fertilizer, although it is a good texturizing agent because of its usual decomposed sawdust content. Rather than using herbal solutions, bio-intensive practices sometimes use weeds, such as stinging nettle, and other plants, such as fava beans, as part of the ingredients in compost piles. Special compost recipes may be created in bio-intensive to meet particular pH, structure, and nutrient requirements. The bio-intensive method of making compost differs from the Relearning method. We use little or no manure and usually no rock powder fertilizers or nitrogen supplements. 5. Fertilizers do not need to be added to the pile since successful compost can be made from a mixture of ingredients. The nitrogen supplements do, however, speed up the decomposition process. Both the biodynamic and Relearning methods are good ones, proven by use over a long period of time. Chadwick's bio-intensive recipe seems simpler to use and equally effective. Some people use the sheet composting, a process of spreading uncomposted organic materials over the soil and then digging them into the soil, where they decompose. The disadvantage of this method is that the soil should not be planted for 3 months or so, until decomposition has occurred. Soil bacteria tie up the nitrogen during the decomposition process, thereby making it unavailable to the plants. Sheet composting may be beneficial if it is used during the winter in cold areas because the tie-up prevents the nitrogen from leaching out during winter rains. Other people use green manures cover crops such as vetch, clover, alfalfa, beans, peas, or other legumes, grown until the plants are at 10% to 50% flower. The nitrogen-rich plants are then dug into the soil. By using these legumes in this manner, a maximum of nitrogen is fixed in their root nodules. The nitrogen is taken from the nodules in the seed formation process. You can tell whether the nodules have fixed nitrogen by cutting one in half with a fingernail. If the inside is pink, they have fixed nitrogen. This is a way to bring unworked soil into a better condition. These plants provide nitrogen without your having to purchase fertilizer, and they also help you dig. Their roots loosen the soil and eventually turn into humus beneath the earth. Fava beans are exceptionally good for green manuring if you plan to plant tomatoes. Their decomposed bodies help eradicate tomato wilt organisms from the soil. However, we find that green manure crops are much more effective when used as compost materials, and their roots still have their good effect in the soil. There are several reasons for this. Due to their high nitrogen content, green manures decompose rapidly and even deplete some of the soil's humus. Another disadvantage of the green manuring process is that the land is not producing food crops during the period of cover crop growth and the 1-month period of decomposition. Additionally, green manures generally produce only about 1/4 the carbon in a given area that carbonaceous compost crops do, and carbon in the form of humus is the most limiting and essential element in maintaining sustainable soil fertility, by serving as the energy source for microbial life and holding minerals in the soil so they cannot easily leach out of it. The advantage of the small-scale grow biointensive method is that backyard composting is easily feasible. When you use compost crops without digging in the crop residues, the growing process will put nitrogen into the soil and make it possible to grow plants, such as corn and tomatoes, which are heavy nitrogen feeders. And the plant residues are valuable in the compost pile. Materials to use minimally or not at all. If you need to use manures and or less desirable materials in your compost pile, they should make up only 1/6 of your pile by volume so their less optimum effects will be minimized. Some materials should not be used in the preparation of compost, including plants infected with a disease or a severe insect attack where eggs could be preserved or where the insects themselves could survive in spite of the compost pile's heat, poisonous plants, such as oleander, hemlock, and castor beans, which harm soil life, plants that take too long to break down, such as magnolia leaves, plants that have acids toxic to other plants and microbial life, such as eucalyptus, California bay laurel, walnut, juniper, and cypress. Plants that may be too acidic or contain substances that interfere with the decomposition process, such as pine needles, which are extremely acidic and contain a form of kerosene. However, special compost piles are often made of acidic materials, such as pine needles and leaves. This compost will lower the soil's pH and stimulate acid-loving plants, like strawberries, ivy and succulents, which may not be killed in the heat of the decomposition process and can regrow when the compost is placed in a planting bed. Pernicious weeds, such as wild morning glory and Bermuda grass, which will probably not be killed in the decomposition process and will choke out other plants when they resprout after the compost is placed in a planting. Cat and dog manures, which can contain pathogens harmful to infants. These pathogens are not always killed in the heat of the compost pile. Note, in order to maintain good soil fertility, approximately 4% to 6% by weight, organic matter is needed in temperate soils. About 3% is desirable in tropical soils. It is noteworthy that the soil organic matter level used to be measured 11 inches deep many years ago. Today, it has been further reduced to less than 6 inches deep. Plants infected with disease or insects and pernicious weeds should be burned to be destroyed properly. Their ashes then become good fertilizer. The ashes will also help control harmful soil insects, such as carrot worms, which shy away from the alkalinity of ashes. Use ashes in moderate amounts. Benefits of compost in the soil. Improved structure. Compost breaks up clay and clods and binds together sandy soil. It helps make proper aeration in clayey and sandy soil possible. Moisture retention. Compost holds 6 times its own weight in water. A soil with good organic matter content soaks up rain like a sponge and regulates the supply to plants. A soil stripped of organic matter resists water penetration, thus leading to crusting, erosion, and flooding. Aeration. Plants can obtain 96% of the nutrients they need from the air, sun, and water. A loose, healthy soil assists in diffusing air and moisture into the soil and in exchanging nutrients. Carbon dioxide released by organic matter decomposition diffuses out of the soil and is absorbed by the canopy of leaves above in a raised bed microclimate created by closely spaced plants. Fertilization. Compost contains some nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur, but is especially important for trace elements. The important principle is to return to the soil, by the use of plant residues and manures, all that has been taken out of it. Nitrogen storage. The compost pile is a storehouse for nitrogen. Because it is tied up in the compost breakdown process, water-soluble nitrogen does not leach out or oxidize into the air for a period of 3 to 6 months or more depending on how the pile is built and maintained. pH buffer. A good percentage of compost in the soil allows plants to grow better in less than optimal pH situations. Soil toxin neutralizer. Important recent studies show that plants grown in organically composted soils take up less lead, heavy metals, and other urban pollutants. Nutrient release. Organic acids dissolve soil minerals and make them available to plants. As organic matter decomposes, it releases nutrients for plant uptake and for the soil microbial population. Food for microbial life. Good compost creates healthy conditions for organisms that live in the soil. Compost harbors earthworms and beneficial fungi that fight nematodes and other soil pests. Ultimate in recycling. The earth provides us with food, clothing, and shelter, and we close the cycle in offering fertility, health, and life through the shepherding of materials. Building a compost pile step by step. 1. Under the pile area, 9 or 16 square feet, loosen the soil to 12 inches deep with a spading fork. 2. Lay down roughage, such as brush or other woody material, 3 inches thick, if it is available, for air circulation. 3. Put down a 2-inch layer of mature material, such as dry weeds, leaves, straw, dry grass clippings, hay, and old garden wastes. Water it thoroughly. 4. Put down a 2-inch layer of immature material, such as fresh weeds, grass clippings, hedge trimmings, green cover crops, and kitchen wastes you have saved. Water well. 5. Cover lightly with a 1/4 to 1/2 inch layer of soil to prevent flies and odors. 6. Moisten the soil. 7. Add new layers of mature vegetation, immature vegetation, kitchen waste, and soil as materials become available until the pile is 3 to 4 feet high. 8. Cover the top of the pile with a 1/2 to 1 inch layer of soil. 9. Water the completed pile regularly until it is ready for use. 10. Let the completed pile cure 3 to 6 months while you are building a new pile. Turn the pile once for faster decomposition. For planning purposes, remember that a 4-foot compost pile will be 1 to 11 or 3 feet high when it is ready to use. Note, we sometimes build a compost pile on an unused growing bed so the next crop grown in that bed will pick up and utilize any nutrients leached out from the pile into the soil. The next season we build compost on another unused growing bed. All compost is not equal. 5 important factors to more compost efficiency. We have discovered 5 factors that may enable grow biointensive compost to have much more power quantitatively and qualitatively. 1. More total compost due to higher yields. The result can be up to 2 to 6 times the cured compost. 2. More possible compost when using a cold composting process. You can try this by using slightly more carbonaceous material and/or less nitrogenous material. More coarse materials and less fine ones, slightly more soil when building the pile, slightly more water when building the pile, and a no-turn approach. The first time we did this, we got 38% more cured compost. One publication implies that up to 100% more may be possible. Note: do you know that some of the compost you build and put into the soil for nutrients for the plants to eat, to act as a sponge to hold water, and to prevent disease, because it contains antibiotics, can last in the soil up to 5,000 years? What a wonderful commitment to sustainable soil fertility. 3. Building a pile with a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio of 44:1, instead of 30:1 or 60:1. Over time the 44:1 cured compost consistently produces higher yields of grain and biomass. In one test comparing these 3 types of compost, the 44:1 derived cured compost produced double the grain and dry biomass. 4. Building a pile which uses more structural forms of carbon, such as cellulose and lignin, mature straw and stalks, and less metabolic forms of carbon, such as sugars and starches, immature leaves and stalks. The result may be more durable, lasting cured compost. 5. Maintaining the curing compost piles carefully. A cured compost pile that has been properly maintained can contain 20% or more humus rather than the more typical 8% to 10%. All cured compost is not equal. 1 cubic foot of cured compost may have double or more the compost power. In a world with increasingly depleted and desertified soils, sufficient amounts of compost will be key. Note: we are finding that cold compost piles, which are built with more carbon and can take up 4 months or more to fully cure, may produce much more cured carbon, humus, and compost per unit of built carbon, possibly even double. This type of composting process is predominantly one of moldering rather than significant heat. If the test results prove consistent over time, the process could be essential to maintaining global sustainable soil fertility, since sufficient humus is the essential to making the fertility possible. You may wish to experiment with this. Many people advocate hot compost piles, because they are said to kill weed seeds, disease organisms, and insect larvae. Hot compost piles cure around 139 degrees F. At this temperature, probably only 25% of these are destroyed. It takes a temperature of about 178 degrees F to kill 100% of them, and this temperature burns a lot of the organic matter that could become cured compost, so we are considering adopting a cooler pile approach. Such piles make greater use of coarse materials, more structural carbon or the mature material input, rather than metabolic carbon, and a little more soil and water. All this means some less nitrogen in the pile and a lower temperature. In fact, in multi-year tests, we have found that using cured compost built with closer to a 45:1 carbon-to-nitrogen ratio than using compost built closer to a 30:1 or 60:1 ratio, have yielded noticeably higher amounts of dry matter and calories. We are looking forward to better understanding why the difference has occurred. Endnotes. 1. Care must be taken to avoid overdependence on worm castings as a fertilizer. The nutrients in them are very available and can therefore be more easily lost from the soil system. 2. Helen Philbrick and Richard B. Gregg, Companion Plants and How to Use Them, Old Greenwich, CT, Devin Adair Company, 1966, pp. 75-76. 3. If for some reason you need compost cured quickly, There are 3 ways to speed up the decomposition rate in a compost pile, though they will probably leave you with much less cured compost per unit of material added to your pile originally, rather than the greatest quantity of life-enhancing compost you must seek. One way is to increase the amount of nitrogen. The ratio of carbon to nitrogen is critical for the breakdown rate. Materials with a high carbon to nitrogen ratio such as dry leaves, grain straw, corn stalks, and small tree branches take a long time to decompose alone since they lack sufficient nitrogen, which the bacteria depend upon for food. To boost the rate of decay in carbonaceous materials, add nitrogen-rich materials such as newly cut grass, fresh manure, vegetable wastes, green vegetation, or a fertilizer such as alfalfa meal. About 12 to 20 pounds of alfalfa meal per cubic yard of compost will fortify a compost pile with a high carbon content. Lightly sprinkle these fertilizers on each layer as you build your compost pile. A second method is to increase the amount of aeration. Beneficial aerobic bacteria thrive in a well-aerated pile. Proper layering and periodic turning of the pile will accomplish this. Third, you may increase the surface area of the materials. The smaller the size of the materials, the greater the amount of their exposed surface area. Broken up twigs will decompose more rapidly than twigs that are left whole. We discourage the use of power shredders because nature will do the job in a relatively short time, and everyone has sufficient access to materials that will compost rapidly without resorting to a shredder. The noise from these machines is quite disturbing and spoils the peace and quiet of a garden. They also consume increasingly scarce fuel. 4. For the biodynamic method of compost preparation, see Alice Heckel, ed. The Pfeiffer Garden Book, Stroudsburg, PA, Biodynamic Farming and Gardening Association, 1967, pp. 3751. 5. For the Rodale method of compost preparation, see Robert Rodale, ed. The Basic Book of Organic Gardening, New York, Ballantine, 1971, pp. 5986.